We'll call to order the meeting of Monday, December 2nd. This is the City Council study session. We don't approve the agenda in this, but I do want to mention that we will be adding at the end of this session and before the general session a brief executive session, and I'll announce that at the end. So, we are ready to go with the Bellevue Economic Development Plan, and Mr. Miyake, I'll let you introduce it.
Thank you, Mayor and Council members. As you mentioned, tonight is a progress report on the update of our Economic Development Plan. And just by way of background, we began the update process earlier this year, and in July of this year, the Council approved 8 objectives for the plan update. Since then, the staff have been out and actually hired a great consultant at Avalanche Consulting, a national economic development consulting firm, who is here with us this evening. They have a wide range of experience, especially as it relates to economic development strategies and initiatives, as well as economic analysis. Joining us this evening is Jesse Canuto, our Chief Economic Development Officer, and to his right is Philly Marsh, Economic Development Manager. Tonight's presentation is an informational update. We are not requesting any formal action on the part of the council. And with that, I'm just going to turn over to Jesse to introduce the guest as well as to kick off the presentation. Jesse.
Thank you, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, members of Council, for time on tonight's agenda to provide you a briefing on where we are with our work to update the city's economic development plan. As the city manager mentioned, tonight's presentation is for information only. No direction is requested. The bulk of the presentation will be presented by Tony DeLisi and John Reese, our consultant leads from Avalanche Consulting. As a quick way of background, tonight is the 4th in a series of meetings with Council on our work to update the economic development plan.
This effort was first introduced to you in January of 2019, and after discussions regarding the objectives and scope of the project, in July of this year, staff released a request for proposal to find a consultant to assist with the plan update. A selection committee that included members from partner organizations selected Avalanche Consulting to facilitate the economic development plan update process. And we are here tonight. I'm excited to be here tonight with our team from Avalanche Consulting, who will share some of the initial findings from their research. Now, the scope of this plan is built around the 8 council-approved objectives, including support for the creative economy, support for small business, support for retail, identifying best practices for integrating new businesses into the community, supporting capacity building for community groups, integrating the recommendations of the recent Visit Bellevue Destination Development Strategy into the plan, as well as make the plan easier to update with a chapter-based framework, and support local workforce development. Our team from Avalanche Consulting had a busy day today with focus groups and stakeholder interviews, and it will continue tomorrow. Our focus groups are around the creative economy, small business, retail, and capacity building. So thank you for this opportunity to introduce you to our consultant team and have them share some of their initial findings from their research. And with that, I turn it over to Tony DeLisi from Avalanche Consulting.
Thank you, and good evening. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. My name is Tony DeLisi, and I'm Vice President at Avalanche Consulting. This is my colleague.
John, Research Director.
And yeah, we're really happy to be here on our first trip as part of this project. We've been doing a lot of work over the past month, both over the phone, chatting with Jesse and Philly, as well as background research and information review. But just a little background, we are both with Avalanche Consulting. We are based in Austin, Texas, but we are a nationally focused economic and workforce development consulting firm. We do a wide range of strategies with communities big and small, rural and urban. Some recent clients of ours that are relatable in some ways to Bellevue include Sonoma County Economic Development Board. We've done work for the city of Provo, Utah, West Palm Beach, Florida. Longmont, Colorado was a joint project with their city and their economic development group. Currently doing work in Cleveland, Ohio around equity and inclusion. We've done work for the Atlanta region, Charleston, Charlotte, really just all over the country, and it's always a pleasure to go into a new community and really come in and with an open mind and understand what are the challenges and the issues and the things that folks are hoping to address. But it's really a national practice, and I think it's important to stress that there isn't a one-size-fits-all with all of this. That client map will show for you that these are very diverse communities, lots of different assets and different challenges and aspirations. And when we're looking at economic development, it's important to come in and understand that the modern economic development field is not a one-size-fits-all. There's a lot of different lenses that you can enter the conversation. You can't talk about economic development without talking about talent and workforce, which gets into topics like affordability and economic mobility and equity and inclusion. It can draw into factors around the environment, thinking about international trade and innovation. There's a lot of different ways that you can enter this topic. And it's important to figure out which ones are most important for this community. In Bellevue, we are lucky that you, the council, were able to identify clear objectives that you would like this plan update to focus on. I won't reiterate, Philly did a great job of going over what those objectives were. And we're really taking these to heart as the key elements that we will be looking on as we develop this plan. Not ignoring other factors, but taking note of them, knowing where they come up, but really honing in and making an effective plan for Bellevue. The process, as we've discussed, will be about 6 months. Our initial phase we call the discovery phase, and that involves both a combination of stakeholder engagement and hearing from people here in the community, as well as an information review process, going through the existing plans and studies that have been completed or ongoing, so that we really don't duplicate efforts and build on good work that has been completed. And that stakeholder engagement is also qualified with a lot of detailed data analysis to update our understanding of where Bellevue is in the current economy, the demographic trends, and how those fit into the broader region in comparison to some benchmarks. All of that information will help us better identify and update our strategies and recommendations in the Economic Development Plan, which will be developed in a more chapter-based format, a focus that really makes it easier to utilize, to change strategies going forward and update different sections as necessary, and looking at as well best practices that can be identified from around the country to really motivate around certain new strategies, show how they can be applied and adapted to fit in Bellevue, and coming up with some clear implementation strategy that partners with other groups in the community, focuses on what the city's role is fitting within that, and specific metrics to track how we're doing along some of those objectives. So just to update you on where we are, we've been at this since in October, and we've completed an extensive information review. You'll see on the next slide a lot of documentation that we've read through and examined. We've had ongoing bi-weekly calls with city staff, identified a number of different stakeholders that we'll be engaging on this trip and throughout the process. Trip 1, we are here and it is underway. We had 2 great focus groups and a few interviews conducted today, with more on the path for tomorrow, and already planning out those same continued interviews and focus groups for our next 2 trips. We also selected benchmark communities to compare Bellevue to look for inspiration and areas where we can learn and see where things are going very well, or there might be some improvement here. And we're doing our ongoing research. This is just a quick look. We've looked at a lot of different work in the region, and it's a testament to a lot of great work that has been done. It's something that I'll speak to on the next slide, or in a few slides, but really impressed by the quality of planning work and engagement and investment that the city as well as regional partners have been making in the community. This map it's hard to see the map, but you can see the names. But in consultation with city staff, we have identified 5 benchmark communities that we'll be comparing Bellevue to in the data analysis to track trends. And those are Sunnyvale, California, Santa Monica, California, Boulder, Colorado, Arlington, Virginia, and Cambridge, Massachusetts. These were identified based on the size of the community, similar characteristics in terms of industry mix, location within a major metropolitan area. They're not all identical to Bellevue, and that's on purpose so that we can understand where there are differences and what do those mean and what kind of lessons can we draw from that. But really thinking about factors like the tourism element that the city council would like to focus on, looking at the types of industries, looking at all of those focus areas that were identified. These communities offer some strong best practices to compare to. And just like to say, feel free, I should have said at the beginning, if you want to ask questions as I go, we'll have time at the end, but always happy to do it as we're going along. But just want to share a few initial impressions and understanding that this is our first trip officially as part of the project to the community. And we have learned a lot today already in our engagements in addition to the research that we've been doing. But the first impressions really are that Bellevue has seen many of the challenges of success that we see with high growth, desirable communities in larger metropolitan areas. When we hear people talking about transportation and affordable housing and the need to keep up with demand for services that come with that type of growth, these are not necessarily unique to Bellevue. I would say if you go to Austin, you ask anybody what are the things you're dealing with, transportation and housing will be number one and number two every single time. And so there's some solace in that you're not alone in these things, but it doesn't make them any easier. There still are ways to deal with that and things that we can consider. And along with that change and that success with that growth, and especially places where people want to live, you see changes around density and what that does to neighborhoods and the characters of communities, and these conversations are happening around the country. I know it also often raises concerns and thoughts around environmental impacts. And something that we're bearing in mind looking at this plan update is thinking about that need for resilience, both fiscal and economic, and they're tied hand in hand, but ensuring that you have a diverse economy and are sustainable in the long term to keep up the services that citizens demand that fundamentally drive the existence of a city, and having that balance of economic activity to provide that sustainable community. So it's a really big moment, I think, always when you're experiencing that growth and seeing that types of change, to take this time to make an intentional effort in a plan to consider what types of investments can we make and can we work with our private partners and nonprofits and others to really plan for the future. And that goes to another effort that we see here with all of this research is there's a really strong effort that the city has made, as well as other regional partners, around intentional planning on these things. Like John and I do this work, many communities around the country, and I'd say very sincerely that it is impressive the amount of work that has been put in to hear from citizens and businesses and neighborhoods, and to think, where do we want to be in the future, proactively make those investments and think about culture, quality of life. I know celebrating the diversity of the residents and the businesses here in the community, the redevelopment efforts that we've seen. We had a tremendous tour to put some images to things we've been reading about around the Bell Red district, the Eastgate Factoria, Crossroads, where we were, was really neat to see today. It was one I hadn't heard as much about, but seeing the thoughtfulness that goes into that is tremendous. And also that emphasis on regionalism and the partnering, things like the Innovation Triangle, a recognition that a community like Bellevue is not standing alone on an island, is part of a broader region, and how those dynamics play out is really important, and it's nice to see that those efforts are going forward and underway. Also, we're jealous as the Austinites looking at the East Link extension and how that's moving forward. We had a light rail bond in our hometown that failed horribly a number of years back, and to see that kind of proactive thinking forward, and even hearing about efforts around the 2040 planning and thinking about that, it's not common around the country, and it is very, very thinking ahead of the curve. So we're really excited to be working here. If you couldn't tell, we're impressed by all of this work, and we hope that we can be helpful in looking at the ways to leverage what Bellevue is already doing and make it even more strong at the things you'd like to be achieving. going to pass it to my
Yeah, and I'll
colleague.
just second Tony's words there, that we're very excited. The level of sort of sustained discipline and long-term planning is quite impressive. We often deal with communities that have either made bad decisions, a lot of sort of infighting, or I would say in certain regards, communities that have experienced a lot of success get a little bit sort of entitled or lazy, and sort of, again, this sort of deliberate long-term effort that you're in proactive development here. You deserve a pat on the back, to be honest. I'm just going to go over 3 quick data slides. This is very sort of top level. I think on our next visit we'll be able to dive a little bit more deeper into some of that economic and demographic trends, but just wanted to talk about some top line data points. All the communities we work in like to sort of boast about how they're unique in specific ways, but I think few can show this level of sort of employment idiosyncrasy. I mean, it's extraordinarily, you have about 50 times the level of software employment relative to the U.S. average, and with just over 100,000 employment, that you've got 5% of all the software publishing jobs in the country. That's just extraordinary. Even when we look at other places like a Santa Monica or a Sunnyvale, it's nowhere near this level. So you are extremely unusual. These, so many other places are envious. They are chasing this industry, and you have it sort of in spades. But I think something to be mindful of is the overall economic diversity within the region. You are relatively undiverse from an economic standpoint, and you're becoming less so. Basically, you have that extraordinary concentration in software employment, and it's among the fastest growing industries in the city. You also need to, I think, be mindful of when we talk about economic diversity, it's not just industry, it's things like occupational diversity, business size, right? If you've got 3 or 4 sort of anchor employers, how do we lift up small businesses so that's sort of balanced out? And so I think that's an opportunity to balance the economy moving forward. Not to say that your existing employers aren't fantastic. I mean, again, most places in the country are deeply envious of sort of the tech companies you have here and the sort of talent pool you have within this community. And finally, speaking of that word of talent and sort of the regional aspect of this is Bellevue has a very sort of unusual labor force draw. I would say 80 to 90% of sort of cities of this size are either sort of a traditional downtown, right, that has a lot of employment but relatively few residents, or it's a bedroom community. You're sort of both, right, where you've got a massive employment center, but you've also got a really strong residential base and actually relatively little overlap between those two. And so when we talk about your labor force, it's not simply the people who live here, but it's all the other people in the greater Seattle region that come into work and vice versa. And so how do we balance those out and be mindful of those various stakeholders within the community? So again, I'll just repeat.
We gotta skip this.
Oh, did it?
Well, we're going to go to this and we're going to go back to
We're
questions.
very excited, and Philly.
Yeah.
So just before we open it up for questions, I just want to let you know where we are in the project timeline. This is Avalanche's first trip. They'll be back January 13th and 14th to reconvene the focus groups and continue their key stakeholder interviews. And then staff will be back the end of January and will present on the data analysis report and key findings the Avalanche will be putting together. And with that, we'll open up.
Thank you.
Well, great. Thank you very much for the report. Thank you for the jealousy from Austin. We're always appreciative of a little jealousy there. And also, you use the word intentional, and I always talk about that word as being important as you look at growth. To be intentional about it, to figure out what you want to be, to figure out how you can do that, and then set a plan to go about doing that. I'm going to, because we'll go back and forth here and let people ask questions or make comments, I'm going to start. I'll tell you I'll do the zipper again this night, but I'll start with Mr. Neuenhaus, and we'll go across the table and back and forth.
Thanks for the presentation. Great to meet you. Glad to hear that you're kind of off and running already. That's fantastic news. Just a couple of quick questions for you. One is, and I'm sure this is not indicative of all your clients, or the different performing economies that you've worked on. But I'm just kind of curious on your slide here, how your approach might be a little bit different, because it looks like a lot of the economies or the cities that you've worked with in the past are East Coast based. I'm just wondering if your approach to a West Coast city like Bellevue is a little bit different in your approach. I'm just curious what your philosophy is on that.
Yeah, and we were asked that in the interview process to think about this, but we have done some work on the West Coast, and I think the most recent was that Sonoma County project that I led.
Okay.
And I think we see every client as different, and our approach is generally to come in and get to know what the client wants to achieve. But I know that every state, no matter where you're working, there's definitely different legal environments and definitely elements that we need to understand and look at. Looking at the cities in terms of what the tax structures and tax base are, and that's part of what we will be analyzing and understanding. And those differ pretty significantly, even from being in Texas to doing work in Ohio.
Right.
See significant difference. I'd say
Absolutely.
one of the biggest things that we do see and very cognizant of and we stress is that stakeholder engagement side and I think transparency. We believe that in that no matter where we're working, but we recognize and are happy when we're working on the West Coast that I think there tends to be a clearer public recognition that we need to be transparent about this and ensure that we have reflected the needs of citizens, and demonstrating that in the process would be one of the bigger differences. Some communities don't care as much about that, but I think we always stress it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then today you were talking about for this trip, getting a sense of Bellevue and the stakeholders, et cetera. I'm just kind of curious, what was your biggest surprise today? What was kind of your biggest takeaway today?
I'll start. I mean, I think one of it was just sort of how nuanced it is. I think talking to local residents, they feel that the perception of Bellevue and the greater Seattle region is, very affluent, and there's just not a lot of sort of diversity necessarily, or not diversity. What I'm trying to say. That everything is like perfect here, and that like you're still not like working hard to make it even better.
Yeah.
It's like you've got all your problems solved, and.
Well, that's right. That's why the mayor's retiring.
But I think that's the outside perspective. But then when you talk to people, everybody sort of still dreams big, right? It's like, well, we've now got all this commerce here. We've got now it's time to double down on things like quality of life investments and arts, and they're still sort of committed to taking it to an even greater level.
Yeah, I think for all the great work that we have seen and the intentionality. In the meetings that we've had, and we haven't talked to everybody, we won't have time to, but there still remains an opportunity, I think, to bring organizations and people together much more. There is a degree of siloing that goes on. I just saw it very clearly with some of the arts groups and people not having a more unified voice and opportunity to kind of engage. And I think that the capacity building efforts that were identified as a focus for this, as well as our conversations with Chris, and I forgot his last name, and Goddard. I'm good. I can do this. Around the public-private partnerships and that creation of the city is really a great step in the right direction towards making that happen. And I know I was happy that this was identified as a focus for this effort.
Yeah.
And I know that people were excited about that topic being brought up, and not just in that focus group around capacity building, but in all the conversations that we're having.
Okay.
Yeah.
Terrific. And then last quick question about, and I'm glad you had this as one of your slides here about building resilience and economic diversity. So I'm just curious, what tools have you seen with other cities that have worked at that greater balance between tech, software / marketing, or manufacturing or healthcare or what have you?
I think you said one of the words, marketing, which is can be a part of that. Is just cities, acknowledging and speaking about what they're trying to grow and making that effort. That does make a difference in terms of recognition and awareness of opportunities. Cities themselves have somewhat control in terms of land use and the decisions that they're making around that, and where they can allow certain uses, and that encourages and can support certain types of businesses inherently on that front. And so having a conversation about what we're trying to grow and what does it take to grow those types of businesses will fundamentally affect those decisions going forward. Education is a big factor.
Yeah.
And in the initial RFP, workforce wasn't identified, but we were very happy to see that was added, in that it is the #1 topic in just about every community.
Yeah.
And so looking at and understanding what your educational resources are and how you direct those has a very big effect on the types of industries that you can grow. So those are just some small examples.
All right,
but-
good. Well, I look forward to hearing more. Thank you.
Great, Mr. Stokes.
Yeah, I was glad to see that it was interesting that you went to Pflugerville.
Oh, yes.
I'm from Texas, so.
I was just there 2 weeks ago. I was presenting to their city council. Like,
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, your reference to Austin, actually, we have you met with the Bellevue Downtown Association, and they go every year to cities, which is, I think, very helpful to us in this type of thing. And we're in Austin at the year they were promoting the light rail thing. And the chamber was very optimistic, but didn't work out,
yeah.
unfortunately. Yeah. But anyhow, I think this is fantastic, and Councilmember Neuenhuis has asked some very good questions on this. And one of the things in getting the briefing on this, I was excited about the creative economy being part of what you're looking at on that, and how you see that as being part of what's moving forward in Bellevue. And of course, that encompasses a lot of the tech industries, but it's more than that. And you mentioned about, one of the concerns we're having is with the arts and culture and all that, how do we maintain that, how we grow that, but how do we not lose it with the, as you know, and you find in cities, when cities have success and the tall buildings are built, that it has often a negative impact on culture and in ways. I mean, it increases it, but it also has some things. So that's something I hope you're looking at. We want to really work on.
We had a lot of great conversation around just that today, and maybe you're familiar with Austin. I know Mayor Adler in Austin is saying, how do we keep Austin weird? Is the big conversation right now. There's a fear of the Californication of Austin, and it's a hard question, and every community is looking at it differently. But a lot of those themes and reasons that we were hearing in our conversation with the creative economy folks today were very similar. And so I think we've got some ideas. We were hearing some great ideas from folks in the room, so we're excited to. I don't want to put the cart ahead of the horse, but
Sure.
I mean, it's definitely a nice play because it's aligned with the emphasis on quality of life, and it's also a great opportunity because it does encompass some of those tech fields to sort of leverage existing strengths while also, again, diversifying the economy.
Yeah, the last point I wanted to touch on is that I like the emphasis on this, but I think the region plays so much a part in this. As you know, this is a unique city in terms of what it has and what it does, and the number of people who actually live in the city. But we are really the cultural and economic driver for a larger, which you recognize in the innovation triangle and that type of thing. But I think that's very important to be looking at that as we go along. How do we increase that? And we're becoming more regional, where the boundaries are, kind of artificial, and that's a huge change. The absolute last thing is, how do you do all this and keep up with the increasing pace of change and driving change? And change happens when overnight when we plan for this and something else comes up and you have to shift. So be interested in how you can help us focus on that.
Yeah, that last one's a very good. They're all very good questions, good points to keep in mind. Certainly thinking about it, the pace of change one is something I know folks are struggling with, and I know that we, in addition to the work that we do, we spend a lot of time reading to make sure that we're thinking ahead to what the next sort of trend is going to be. If you'd asked anybody in this field 15 years ago, they wouldn't have thought that equity and inclusion issues would be top of mind, but we're having these conversations in every community across the country today. Or, autonomous vehicles wouldn't have been on people's radar 20 years ago. But I know that we're going to always do our best, and with this, think about ways to be flexible and recognize, I always say, planning, there isn't an end destination. We're going to keep growing as a city. So how do you build a plan that's responsive and understanding and flexible in a way, focused on a goal, but flexible to changing conditions and able to adapt. And I think the goal of making this easier to use and format can make the plan itself inherently easier to change. And using metrics is also a helpful way to be ready for those things, so that your finger's on the pulse of what's happening in your economy, and you're more responsive to bigger changes down the road and ready to adjust.
I'll also add, I think there's tremendous benefit in being fairly significantly ahead of the curve in a lot of these areas already. I think one of the interesting consequences of not being able to offer incentives, for example, is that economic development in this country kind of comes out of just like offering the most incentives in the lowest cost environment possible, which is a model the South has used pretty heavily. And it's only been in the last, I'd say, 10 to 15 years, as we've moved to an emphasis on talent, that you've really seen investments in sort of your product and quality of place that have become paramount in things like transportation or transit. And again, for your transit system, that was a decision that was made 10 or 15 years ago, and there are places like Austin that haven't even gotten there today. And so even if we decide to move, that would be 15 years. And so I think you're going to continue to benefit from those past decisions that sort of embraced a long-term vision.
Just that reminded me real quick, I always like to say this, I think it's important, but that investment in people and placemaking in the community is so critical, because I always say, I really believe this, at the end of the day, what's economic development about? It's about people, and it's about a community. I think people can get very fixated on the high level and forget about the foundation of what this matters and why we do this. It's to make your community more whole, to have jobs for people that live in the community, to have a sustainable working place that people love. And so any effort that does focus on the community itself, on the people that are here in the businesses, will always be paying dividends in the long run.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lee.
Thank you. Thank you for taking on this wonderful opportunity to come to help us. And I think you just said it, the right thing. Talent and people and community where people are living. We are very blessed, city of Bellevue. You said it, when you meet with the folks here, you notice that we are a great city. And it's the great people that make us a great city. But at the same time, we are not complacent. We're still looking for better. So that's the challenge. And it's great that you're coming from another place, that you are not part of the people here that you're already used to the greatness. Maybe you say, well, why are you doing? What are you looking for better? You come from the outside with a different perspective. Hopefully you see something that we can actually learn and improve on, and we might appreciate. So I think that's very important. You talk about also placemaking. It's really the things that we do to encourage, to provide the talent, the people, to get better. Sometimes it's not just outwardly looking for something, but it's developing our own talent. And with that, we'll get other things. So one of the things that I'm going to comment is, I really appreciate this holistic view that you have. That's what makes economic development, the lens of modern. And I think we have certain things we, are already managing, but a few things that I hope you can help us discover is, what are the things that we could still do more, do better, compared to other cities that you are comparing with, the benchmark, Silicon Valley. You mentioned, even more technologically blessed. I mean, talk about blessed, I just want to add one more. We just celebrated Thanksgiving, right? So it's very appropriate for me to say that we're very blessed. We have lots to thank for. Anyway, Silicon Valley. So we are actually more in terms of technology, jobs and all that, even better than Sunnyvale. So what's there for us to do even better, to do more, or to a different way of adding to the economy or to the quality of technology we already are enjoying? I think would be a good perspective to have. We don't want to say, well, going to be another Silicon Valley. No, we have our own strength and assets. how can we duplicate, well, maybe not, but learn from what other cities have done, that we can have our own brand of technology superiority. I think that's what would attract talent to come here. So with talents, we can then attract other quality of life. So going back to this holistic view, so I'm looking at entrepreneurship and innovation. Where do we compare with others, such as Silicon Valley? I imagine they have their own experience. They've grown to where they are. Where are we in terms of that entrepreneurship and innovation? What can we do, to get to where they have been, what they are going to, a different way? That's one. And another thing that's mentioned as part of the talent and people, it's arts, culture, and recreation, because that's what is bring people here. That's what the people we have here. And I think we are now becoming a global city. We have the diversity we have. We have people from all over the world because the talents come here. They are attracted to become technology workers. That's why you see such a great 50 whatever index that means. It's amazing because of the technology talent. So in order to even bring more the potential out, what arts and culture can help to cultivate that even fuller. I think that's what we want to do.
So,
Yeah.
two great questions.
Yeah.
In there.
One more. Yeah. Well,
Okay.
I'm not going to talk anymore. Okay. The last one is it's engagement, stakeholders engagement. You have learned that also by talking to the people here in say Bellevue. It's talking to folks, knowing what the public wants, talking to the folks. And don't forget, part of engagement is talking to, I hope that you've identified us, city council members, as stakeholders. So you will schedule a meeting to talk to us. If you schedule me to talk to us, I can bend your ear for the next 10 hours. So I will quit now if I have the opportunity to come to
A clear day.
If I don't, you'll be hearing from me.
Okay.
So,
For 12
Yeah,
hours.
for 12 hours.
actually, a couple of very good questions in there that I'd like to hear from you. Where are we in terms of entrepreneurship? What can we do that would increase that? And how do you see us where we are on the arts, culture, and the recreation? We have a great parks system. Maybe arts and culture, you mentioned that earlier as one that feels siloed. So could you just opine on that?
Yeah, and I don't want to preclude us having completed all of our data research in some of these areas, but initially I'll say you have that incredibly high concentration of software jobs, where Silicon Valley has higher ones is more on the technology side of things, on the actual devices and the manufacturing of things. And that is linked more towards the universities that are there. I went to Stanford for my undergrad, the high level of research and engineering that is coming out of that. Bellevue not having a major research university, there is, I haven't pulled the data yet, but there's highly likely much less of that patent output and that particular type of innovation. The region, though, is abundant in that in certain degrees, and with the aerospace side of things, the University of Washington is a major research university. There are components of that spread throughout, and I haven't pulled it, but I'm sure we would see this. What we'll often find is communities like Bellevue, in a region like this, high concentration of people holding patents, those inventors living here in the community. They might be working for companies that are outside, as we see with those commuting patterns, or going to the University of Washington and doing that research, but they're here. And I guarantee you there are a lot of inventors and folks here. We can pull that information and have a better quantification of what that looks like. But in terms of larger institutional research dollars, they're not necessarily in Bellevue. But again, regionally, there's efforts. I think part of our mission with the small business effort is not just looking at small retail businesses, but the whole range, Startup 425 group and others. How can we support things from a technology firm getting started here all the way to a small mom and pop business? So we'll get better handle on that, but I think there's always room to grow that effort, and I think it's an important part of the economic development puzzle.
And that's part of private-public partnership that you're looking at.
Yes, and
We have great companies that can
and that's how Stanford
innovation culture.
the beginning of Silicon Valley and that origin was the Stanford Industrial Park, which was specifically spinning off those companies from Hewlett Packard and all the others and getting it going. And there's the reason those fields turned into what you see today. On the arts side of it, general impressions, I think, this area of the country is very well known for the parks, the outdoor recreation, the tremendous lifestyle that's available here. And I know there is a lot to celebrate on the arts. We met with some great organizations here. I think that it is less concentrated than you would see in some areas, and that it has the potential to be. And there's opportunity for greater coordination. It's a challenge with cost of living and other factors, but I think it could be more robust. I think it could always be more robust. It's how do we continue to push that a little bit.
Okay, good.
Another
Mrs.
real
Zahn?
positive things about sort of park space and continued investments in that space when it comes to sort of cultural facilities. I think that's a bit of a challenge.
Exactly. Ms. Zahn?
Yeah, thank you. I really like the presentation so far. One thing is 25% of startups, I understand, used to work for Microsoft, so, we do have pieces of that. When I look at the holistic view, I really like that lens. I would say that one thing, as I'm reading this, I don't see the word sustainable in here, so perhaps when we think about the environment and public spaces, we can think about sustainability in that lens as well. And then I guess for me, one thing I would want to know is as you look at our objectives, I'd want to ask the question, what's missing? Right? Are there things that we thought in our infinite wisdom we had covered, but as you look at us, you'd say, oh, there's something missing? And then the other one is, as you look at the preliminary findings, would you still choose the same 4 peer cities? Or would you choose some other cities? Because as you look at our demographics or the pieces that make us a little unusual, right, both the employment center and the bedroom community, are there other cities that may be closer to us than the ones that you chose initially based on just looking at us from the data?
And we factor those in somewhat, but
We actually started with a much bigger list, and honestly, I feel pretty comfortable with it. I mean, there's, just from a filtering perspective, there's very few communities that are as educated as what is it, like 70%? So that automatically eliminates probably 90% of communities in the country. Then you look at, this wasn't an absolute requirement, but we thought it would be preferable that it also be situated in a major metropolitan area, because that informs a lot of what's going on here, is that you've got a vibrant city, but like I said, there's sort of that regional access to labor and town and major facilities like an international airport that you wouldn't normally see in a city like 100,000. And these are also places that you probably are competing for talent, right? Is that if you look at, I was talking about this earlier, I don't know how many people heard the story last week from the Census Bureau. It's been the true case. Pretty much every fall they publish how often people are moving from place to place. It's pretty much fallen consistently for 50 years straight. It hit an all-time low this year, but the places that people are moving to are relatively limited to 10 or 15 metropolitan areas, and so it is places like moving from, Bellevue to Silicon Valley to Boston and vice versa. So I feel pretty comfortable. I'm very comfortable with the benchmark list. I would also add, though, that when we talk about things like best practices and case studies, we will be by no means limited to those cities. I think there's a lot to learn from a lot of different communities.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then my question on the objectives, I think as you move along, take a look at that. Because as I think about inclusive economies, I wonder whether it's fully covered in there, because I don't see the word inclusive in there, which.
Well, I know
I
we
think it's
stress,
important.
and we put it in a proposal, and I firmly believe this too. Equity and inclusion have become very buzzwords in a lot of things, but we really, really take this effort to heart. The project I'm leading in Cleveland right now is an inclusive growth strategy just for the city of Cleveland, and looking at how they address long-term systemic disparities and big topics like racism as a community. It's very big issues, but I know that we have a lens to that in anything that we're looking at, and kind of factoring in how those issues play out, and certainly pulling in, and we'll call attention to anything that kind of pulls out.
Thanks. And then on the info review, a couple things I noticed. our smart city strategy I don't see in here. Our diversity plan, our universal space design, which I think we're really proud of, some of the ADA work that Blaine's been doing. And then our ESI, environmental sustainability, because it seems like, I think about the fact that this is a place where we very much care about the environment. And from an economic development, are there some economies and some businesses that we could be attracting that are also attracted to smart cities and sustainability? So just a couple things there that I wondered about. And then I think lastly, in terms of as you look at the people you're going to meet, I want to make sure that we are meeting with some of our community organizations that are very diverse, because I think they might bring a voice that is not as heard as it could be. When I think about inclusive economies, the new foundation, Eastside for All, that's being started, and one of their pillars is inclusive economies, so spending some time maybe looking at what they're doing to get some alignment there. So really excited though, thank you.
Thank you, and those are great suggestions. And I was an environmental science undergrad, and I always want to make sure that we're stressing that side. I think the new REI facility is a testament to the recognition that this is a community that cares and is
And it
thinking about
can
those
start to
things.
bring that diverse economy, because I do worry that the workforce development piece, we're becoming a much more expensive place to live. And so if we have a hard time retaining talent because they can move somewhere farther away and pay a lot less for housing, then we will start to be in a downward spiral,
Yeah.
which we want to avoid. Thanks.
Deputy Mayor Robinson.
So, you should have met with each of us individually, I think. Everybody has a lot to say, including me, but I'll try to be short. So I'm kind of stuck on this economic diversity thing with the IT being our main business sector. If you think of IT being a pencil, everybody uses pencils. And our pencils are used in all these different business sectors. And if you take the pencil-making companies away, and we have probably the most pencil-making companies here, you take those away, we still are a super diverse economy. And so it's kind of an interesting way of looking at it. I know that we hire a lot of people to supply the pencils and to come up with new applications of them, but we are, outside of that, a very diverse economy here.
No, and I think there's a lot of diversity in terms of the types of software that you're making. You've got Bungie making, video games, and you've got SAP Concur making financial services software, and those are very different types of areas. And so I think the analysis that we're going to have in here is more diverse than just that simple metric of looking at it.
Yeah.
But that is a factor of, a large share of the jobs in the community are in software exclusively. And if you take those out, it changes somewhat. And I think the concern that some folks sometimes have with, if you look at the 2001 crash and what happened to a lot of communities was there were significant job losses in software, and that was across a wide range of areas. And it's not to say that it's inherently bad, but always just having an eye to understanding what the dynamics are of our economy and what some opportunities might be to grow other sectors such as, outdoor recreation, goods, or things along those lines, to see how we can just be cognizant of those types of opportunities.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me, so thank you. And I'm excited to be working with you and to see what you come up with.
Thank you. Ms. Robertson.
Thanks. So this is pretty exciting. So I understand that you're talking to a lot of stakeholders, but we haven't seen that list. So it's hard for me to recommend it or know if there's any you missed because we haven't seen that list. So Jesse, can you please share that list with council so that we can know if there's something missing? Or do you have the list? Does someone have it?
We don't have it on us right now, but we can
Well, no,
share it with the
not your
council. We do have a list. We've reached out to over 100
Right, it said that in the
stakeholders
packet, and
community.
it said you're gonna talk to 75, but I don't know which 75, so, it's hard for me to give input if I,
Yes, we do have a summary sheet, so we'll make sure to get that to you.
yeah, please send that out. So, because that's one of the ways you're going to get to know Bellevue. And I know we don't have incentives, but just FYI, we also don't have tax increment financing allowed in the state of Washington. So just in case you were going to suggest some of that. So I think that looking at the two themes of diversity as well as quality of life are really good ways to go. I'll start with diversity because we've had a lot of conversation about that. One of our taglines is diversity is our strength, but we talk about it about the people, but I think it is equally applicable to businesses because if you have one sector that is so strong and we have we had the dot bomb in around 2000, then you really are weakened if that one particular sector doesn't. I think tech is going to continue to grow. I think it's going to stay strong for quite a while. But diversification is really important. It's also important to avoid what you were saying about Austin of the Californication. One of the things that the council discussed in setting our priorities for our objectives was retaining diverse local businesses because what is happening is as the value of land is going up, which it is significantly, a lot of the businesses are getting pushed out that are the ones that we all need for our day-to-day life, whether it's to service my car or fix the sewing machine or something like that. They can't afford to be here. And if they can't afford to be here, then the people who live here will have to go further afield or engage in more of a throwaway economy and just get new. And that's not good for anybody. It's not good for traffic. It's not good for the environment. It's not good for just for sustainability purposes. So I think that that's something that I just want to make sure you're aware that the council had that discussion. It also has to do with startups and innovation. And this is, we don't have a major research university here. We do have Global Innovation Exchange. I hope you're aware of that. And Bellevue College. So we need to make sure that we continue to, in addition to having affordable housing for people, for the talent to live in, having affordable space so those startups can germinate and grow is really important. I don't know how to get there, but hopefully you guys can create some plan for that. And just FYI, we have the company that's one of the top 5 owners of patents in the United States in Bellevue, and that's called Intellectual Ventures. just so you know. So on to quality of life. I think that looking at all of the ways that why people like to live here is really the way to go. There's a couple things that I haven't heard mentioned directly. And so one of them is, which we don't have a say in, but is really important to our economic development plan and livability, is our school district. Our school district is an excellent public school district, and making sure that that stays strong, I think is going to be a component that we don't have control over, but it's a factor. Also, amenities, I want to make sure you're aware of some of the amenities that we're working on as they can feed into the economic development plan. One is the Grand Connection, of course. We're also working on a regional aquatic center, which is an important recreation amenities, as well as adding more parks and open space and arts and culture. Also, to the extent that those core governmental services like public safety, I think that if you don't have utilities and public safety, you're 3 days from chaos, right? So, seriously. So making sure that those remain strong, I think, is really an important part of keeping our economic core really strong, as well as the autonomous vehicles and the smart city. Rolling out the 5G, I think that's going to be a really important way to strengthen our economy to keep it going. So those are just some comments. You don't need to reply back because we're running short of time, but I'm looking forward to this. And you'll come back in January, yeah?
Yes.
All righty, thanks. And yeah, I agree with the comment that if you want to talk to council members, maybe we should work that in at the January meeting or January time period when you come back. So, thanks.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Just a quick question and then maybe a comment. When you're talking about the 5% of all software jobs in America, is that Bellevue or is that more the east side that you're talking about?
That's Bellevue, and that's software publishing jobs.
Software publishing.
So you could be working for software in a bank, and that would not capture that. Which is an interesting, sort of a great marketing advantage Because it's much more common that we work for communities that actually have a lot of tech talent, but it's embedded in things like, let's say, a bank.
Insurance
Or
companies,
insurance company, and so they're not known for having tech talent, even though they have a lot of it, it's just not in the tech industry. So when it comes to software publishing, Bellevue, the city, has 1 in 20 software publishing, people who work for software publishing firms.
That's an amazing number,
It's
and it's got to be much higher when you look at even that innovation triangle number.
Yeah.
It's got to be. Sorry, I lost a train of thought on one, so I'm going to go into my point, and then maybe I'll remember the other question I had to ask. I apologize. Well, I guess it is really just the issue of how does economic development help solve these really weighty issues that we have, in particular diversity, inclusion, and the socioeconomic features that we have, where it's not just people who are at the very low end of the socioeconomic structure that can't afford to live in Bellevue. And you go from becoming an unaffordable community to becoming an exclusive community. That's not good. It is a problem, as you say, that virtually worldwide, you have a strong economy, you've got transportation and housing issues. There's no doubt around that. I guess since I only have this meeting and another one to go, I would really encourage, as part of our public-private partnership, looking at ways that we can break that cycle. Just with, as I say, just with transportation, you do have to build, but you can't just simply build your way out of congestion by just building more roads. Got to be smart and have people be jealous about having transit and all of these other types of methods. The same, I think, is true of housing. You can't not build housing and get out of the affordability unless there's a crash. But I think that there are ways that you can not only make housing more affordable than just massively densifying. And so working on ways, and the one report, the Challenge Seattle report, the one that really strikes me that is so important about Bellevue is one of the things that hampers us is simply the cost of the dirt. When we sell our house, it will be knocked down. I mean, there's just no doubt. And so I think from that standpoint, I think that that is something that we ought to match up our economic development with our public-private partnership, with our planning group, and try to figure, and maybe development services. We do a really good job, actually, of getting development permits through the process. I guess I will leave it at that. I remembered the last question, but we can catch up at some point in time, or I can ask one of the remaining council members to ask you when you have your meeting. So thank you very much for the check on this. I guess I was just going to mention that when I got on council and ran for council, we had 3 buildings in downtown Bellevue that were capped off. They had not cut, they had dug the foundations, put the foundations in, but they were capped off. The last one of those to be built is now being built for Amazon.
Wow.
So it's under construction right now, just across the street. And if you're here tonight and you're not going anywhere for a little while, I'd really suggest you run up to the botanical garden and see the garden delights and take some pictures and take that concept back to your other cities. It's pretty amazing. So,
Is that different from the?
That's from the magical.
Different, yes.
Okay.
We
yeah.
heard about the magical.
The magic season. Yeah, go up tonight and see Garden Delights, especially if you're headed back
Make my wife
tomorrow.
jealous.
It's pretty doggone special.
She loves
Thank you, and again, and
you
I
so
know.
much.
Thank you very much. We're
Yep.
very happy to be here.
You all have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. You too. Okay. We are now moving on to, again, talking about great places that we have. A discussion regarding the Newport Hills Southeast 60th Street Neighborhood Park, the work that has been going on with the neighborhood and the work that's been going on with the Parks Board and Mr. Miyake.
Thank you, Mayor and Council members. Just by way of background with relative to this project, the council acquired the Tyler property up in the Newport Hills in 2010 and subsequently 2 adjoining properties for purposes of developing a neighborhood park in the Newport Hills neighborhood. And then in 2019 to 2025, in the CIP budget, the council approved funding to develop a park. And since that time, staff has been working closely with the neighborhood to create a plan for the park. Staff are here this evening to discuss the public engagement process as well as to present the Park Board recommendation to the council. Staff is seeking any council feedback on that Park Board recommendation, and joining this evening is Shelley McVeigh, the Parks Director, as well as Glenn Coast, our Park Planning and Development Manager. With that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Shelley.
Good evening. I also want to acknowledge with us this evening, we have our Parks and Community Services Chair with us, Heather Trescas, who's in the audience this evening. And yes, so tonight we are just here seeking feedback on the preferred plan. The Parks Board has engaged in an extensive community outreach process with the community. Glenn Close will be walking us through the process that has helped to inform the Park Board and talk about the information that has led to the Park Board coming up with its preferred recommendations. So with that, I'm going to just turn it over to Glenn Close.
Thank you, Shelley. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. I think it's actually interesting. We're following the economic development presentation. I'm sure, Brad, you carefully planned this. And while it's always good to look ahead 10 or 15 or 20 years, it's also great that we can work with the development or with the community to develop these public spaces, these so-called people spaces that really help make Bellevue a great place to live. So that's why we're here tonight, is to talk about one of those, what we hope to have as a great place. So what we're talking about tonight is Newport Hills Neighborhood Park. And briefly, this is the area of the community we're talking about. This is the Newport neighborhood area, which is outlined in red. The area outlined in the dashed blue is the what we call the mailing limits. That's the limits that we distributed flyers to announcing the various meetings, and of course the red being the park along Southeast 60th that was acquired initially in 2010 as the Tyler property, and then we acquired additional property. This is the Tyler property right here, and then to the north of that, the Patterson piece was acquired in 2015, about 5 acres, and then just about a year ago we acquired the Brick property. So altogether, we have a property of about 13.7 acres. A majority of that, about 10 acres of that, about 3/4 of it is acquired as open space for preservation purposes, and it's heavily wooded and steeply sloping. The area outlined in yellow is what we refer to as the developable area. It is largely an open grass area and gently sloping. So it's been used as an off-leash area since the city acquired that back in 2010. Part of the outreach, just briefly summarize the outreach that we started with a meeting in May. Generally speaking, we have the outreach on each of the meetings was identical, where we distributed over 3,000 flyers mailed to all the residents within that dash line. We also advertised on our website. Newport Hills advertised on their website. It was also advertised through Nextdoor and also on the so-called Gov Alerts. So you can sign up for that. And this is the attendance at each. We conducted 3 meetings. The first one was actually hosted by the Newport Hills Community Club. The second 2 were hosted by the City of Bellevue. And we had the attendances shown there, and these are all the responses that took the form of comment cards, emails, and in one case, we conducted a survey, an online survey. So you've received comments in the past few weeks suggesting that the feedback that we've received and that that are reflected in your packet tonight in the report really didn't reflect the views of the neighborhood. That's actually not the case. We've, working closely with our IT department, we've put together the so-called Heatmap here that reflects the input and the attendance. This happens to be of the September 24th community meeting, where we had sign-in sheets, where we actually had a sign-in sheet for both the July and September meetings. The July meeting would look very much like this. This is where the people came from that signed in to the meeting. If you notice, the September 24th, 53 people, not including myself or other City of Bellevue staff or council members or park board members. In fact, we had 3 to 4 park board members at each of the community meetings, and council members also attended. And they are not counted in here, but the vast majority of folks that attended the meetings and that submitted comments were in fact from Newport Hills. So, So, based on the first meeting, we met with the community May 21st, and that we received a significant amount of feedback from that meeting. And based on that feedback, we prepared 3 alternative plans. They look, at first glance, fairly similar to each other. They reflect a very similar plan. The difference being alternative A would be the least developed, has the fewest amenities, B a few more, and C is pretty robust in terms of the number of amenities, which reflects almost to a T the feedback that we received from the community, the representative sampling of the comments received that requested not just an off-leash area, but a number of different general use amenities such as picnic areas, open space, play areas, loop trails are all reflected in these plans, each of which has a similar concept. But then we took these plans to the next community meeting in July, and also to the park board. And this is the feedback that we received from that. And you'll notice there's a strong preference. This is the community. This is the survey that we took, but is also reflective of a lot of the comments we received, both comment cards and emails. That was a strong preference for the alternative C, and there were a lot of combination. Most of the combination comments were they wanted a combination of amenities that were both in options B and C. So there was a strong preference for the greater the number of amenities, the more popular it became. Park Board expressed similar support for alternative C, although there was quite a bit of interest in considering a smaller off-leash area. Each of the alternatives had the off-leash area at a roughly 60-40 split, about 60% of the developed area devoted to off-leash and about 40% devoted to the general use area. The park board suggested, several of the park board members suggested that a smaller off-leash area would be more reflective of a neighborhood facility. Others thought alternative C was right-sized. So the consensus was that we should reduce the OLA, so we did in the following iteration of the plan. We developed a preferred plan that reduced the size of the OLA to an equivalent size of the general use area. So rather than about an acre and 3/4 versus an acre and 1/4 for general use area, both of the areas are roughly an acre and a half in the preferred plan. So this is basically Some of the features that are in the plan, the equivalent size of the off-leash area and general park area. The picnic shelter and open lawn area was an extremely popular request for community gatherings, neighborhood gatherings. The off-leash area would be fully fenced and separate and apart from the general use area. There would be an adventure-themed play area. The comments were that we do have a number of play areas in the neighborhood, one down the street at the Newport Hills Park, a couple of in the schools, so we thought a kind of a unique play area would be in keeping with those comments. So we landed on an adventure-themed play area. Loop trails were, again, extremely popular amenity requested. So there are loop trails throughout the site. Street frontage improvements, and in particular, a crosswalk across Southeast 60th for safety purposes, a paved entry drive, parking, and restroom. So this is the preferred plan that was the combination of community input and park board input. So essentially what we did is we took, it looks very similar to Alternative C, although we took this area here, this walkway, and moved it from where it used to be right here. We moved it toward the street, reducing the area of the off-leash area, increasing the area of the size of the general use area, so that the two are roughly equivalent in size. So that's the key difference. But in terms of the remaining amenities, very similar. Loop trails that will have a number of different options. You can walk this loop. You could walk a larger loop. There's access from 116th Street through the adjacent school district property. There will be crosswalk across Southeast 60th right here at the southeast corner of the park. The entry drive will be paved with some parking, a community shelter here with a gathering area, open lawn play, and adventure play area in this area. One of the options, actually, we had talked with the community about actually putting the adventure play areas within the woods. Not a good idea. There's security issues. Then I'll talk about that in a minute. But then going back to this, we then reviewed this at the third community meeting, and we got generally favorable comments from the community. The majority of people there said they liked the plan, though if they had their druthers, they would rather revert back to the size of the OLA in Alternative C, which was the larger size OLA. But we did not change the plan, and then presented this along with those comments to the park board at their November meeting, and they reviewed that, and there was a extremely robust conversation, mostly centered around the relative appropriateness of the sizes of the OLA and the open play area. And at the end of the day, they unanimously recommend that we move forward with the plan that has equivalent spaces, equivalent size OLA and general use area. So that's where we're at right now, and that's the recommendation from the park board, and it was a unanimous recommendation. So what we're asking for is feedback on that plan so that we can get into more detailed design, engineering, permitting. One of the things I mentioned earlier about the permitting is because the site is kind of long and skinny, and here's the road where most of your access and vehicles go, and here is where a lot of the developed areas, the picnic area and the playground. And so it's a long way. So what we're going to be doing as part of the permit process is working with our police department within a concept called CPTED, which is crime prevention through environmental design. We'll work with them. We did this earlier with our Lewis Creek picnic area, where that's sort of in the woods, and we work with them. Visibility is a big thing, and security is a big thing. So we're going to work with them to see what kind of things we need to do to make sure that we not only create a fun environment, but also a safe one. So those are the kind of things that we're going to be working with through the permit process. And if things progress well, we will be in a position to have a park available by the end of next year. So we're kind of anxious to move this forward, pending any comments that you have tonight. So with that, I would ask for any feedback you have.
Okay, we're going to go in the opposite direction as what we just did before. So I'm going to ask Jennifer Robertson, who is our liaison to the Parks Board, to go first. Could I, before we go, I just want to make sure that we're mindful of our time. We need about 15 minutes for an exec session.
I have a fair amount of things that I want to share with the council as liaison, but then I'll try to keep my comments brief. But before we begin, I wanted to thank you, Glenn, for your many years of service to Bellevue. I know this is going to be your last council meeting. You have your fingerprints on a whole lot of good work over the years. How long have you been with the city?
18 years.
18 years,
Yep.
so almost 2 decades.
Yep.
Downtown Park, Main Bar Park, lots of smaller parks, open space. You've been a wonderful park advocate, and I really want to thank you on behalf of the whole council for your service.
Thank you.
So, and I also wanted to let the council know, well, and many council members do know, that the Parks Board members really went above and beyond on this. It was a kind of a quick time frame to get this done so it can be built next year. And we had Board members going to the community meetings. We had council members going to the community meetings. So I really do think that people were very involved and interested in getting this right. So with that said, I think that this is a good plan. It seems to have good support and good amenities. I was on the council when we bought this piece of property, and it was purchased for the neighborhood as a neighborhood park. So the conversion of some of it to off-leash areas has been tough. So for some folks, because that's not typically a neighborhood park use. So I appreciate the rebalancings. My understanding about the balancing is that it is due to a lot of the topography. For example, if we had wanted to put the off-leash area to 1 acre, there'd be a lot of kind of dead areas unless we brought in massive amounts of dirt for grading. Is that right?
That's right. One of the things we've been able to accomplish with the plan, and again, it's conceptual, but we believe when we get to the engineering, we'll be able to separate those 2 uses in a very effective way topographically, because although when you look at it, it looks flat. It's really not flat. It's gently sloping, basically from the northeast to the southwest. And we think we can take advantage of that and in effect, have the off-leash area in the so-called front of the park and the general use area in the back separated not just by a fence, but also topographically. So I think it could really work, I think, to the advantage of everybody.
And if we were to make significant changes of this, that would trigger some SEPA. How much delay are we talking about?
6 months minimum. If we wanted to go through SEPA, programmatic SEPA, planning level SEPA, we've experienced between 6 and 12 months.
Okay. So if we want this built next year, we kind of need
It
to
won't.
nibble around the edges.
We'll go through SEPA
yeah.
as part of
Sure.
the project level SEPA. So we
Right.
will have an environmental review for sure.
Right. All right. I just wanted to get that out there. So to me, I think that this is really important, particularly the people part. One of the things that we bought this park for is that Newport Hills neighborhood can really no longer have their neighborhood picnics because they can't do it on the turf. So are we going to be able to service Newport Hills neighborhood with this park as designed for their community events?
Sure. Absolutely.
Okay, and my understanding is that if they were having a really large event, we would close and clean the off-leash area so that could be utilized.
All that is possible.
For people space.
Yep.
Alrighty. So I think that's really important. I also would encourage, as we go through the process of doing final design, to maximize the people use, maybe make sure take a look at whether we can have those exercise equipment for adults in there, which was originally in the plan. Make sure that the loop trail is really safe, and to make sure that the people space is at least half, no less than half of the space. That's my comments on that. The other thing I think is going to factor in the success of this park is going to be in the implementation. making sure making sure that people don't just let their dogs in the off-leash area and go hang out in the people space in the overlook. I mean, that could be a real problem. We may need to add the ranger to that location for some of the time, and making sure that making sure people clean up after themselves and whatnot. So I think enforcement is going to be really important. The other thing that I think is going to be really important, and this is a question, is we are getting more and more requests for off-leash areas as our city ages, and as we have a younger population, and people are having fewer kids. People are having more dogs. Or they're acquiring more dogs. They're not having the dogs. But so there's more and more desire for this. And so we're updating the citywide park plan next year, or is it? Okay. I think it would be really appropriate to add off-leash areas or dog uses to that so that we can determine what level of service we need for that amenity and crank it into the plan. Because the reason that this has been such an issue is there are not really enough off-leash areas in the area to service the need. And so I think we need to really look at that as part of the next planning. Would that be something that would normally go in, or is that something you need council to direct?
It's something, there's a small element currently in there, but we can expand upon that, looking at the level of service.
Yeah, I think that would be really appropriate. But otherwise, I'm comfortable with it as long as we make sure that the people part is at least half. I'm comfortable moving forward, and I thank the staff and the Parks Board and all the neighborhood folks for their involvement and hard work.
And Deputy Mayor Robinson, who is a former member of the Parks Board and a former liaison to the Parks Board.
So Glenn, first I just want to congratulate you on an amazing career with the city of Bellevue. I first met you when you had finished the park up at Crossroads.
Oh, yeah.
And that was such a unique park to put in Bellevue, and it was immediately so popular.
Yep.
And I've seen the whole process of going into communities, procuring the land, making the plans, engaging with the neighbors, and then creating these amazing spaces that Bellevue is really pretty known for. I would say even nationally. So I want to thank you for your excellent work.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah, Bellevue does have some spectacular places to go. No doubt about it.
And I have a confession to make.
Uh-oh.
I was in the process of the Surrey Downs Park. And I remember how tough that was. And there were so many neighbors that were so concerned about how that was going to turn out. And when I saw the drawings for it, I just thought, this is not going to be good. And I'm so wrong. It's so different than the Maidenbower Bay Park, which opened, I think, like within the month of each other. Completely different and yet equally successful. And so I just learned from that when you see something on paper, you really can't appreciate it until it's been developed. But I want to thank you for your good work, and I'm excited about this park. And I really want to thank the community for all their efforts, and that they attended all those meetings and weighed in. And I definitely see their input reflected in this park. As Councilmember Robertson said, this is a community who lost its green field to have their community events, and they're going to get it back. And it's, I think, the same. How does it compare to the dimension of the original green field?
Oh, it's very similar.
Yeah.
Very similar, yeah. And frankly, the plan is a reflection of the community. It's not what we've continued to convey to the neighbors, that this isn't our park, it's your park. So what you see up there is a reflection of what they wanted.
I haven't seen anything like it in Bellevue, and I'm looking forward to being there in person. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ms. Son.
Thank you, Glenn, because having been to all of the meetings and listening to the work, I really appreciate the staff. And I especially appreciate, I don't know if it was talked about in other information, but you took the time to actually show perspective of the different areas. So after the first meeting, when folks were struggling with, well, what does an acre and a half look like? I think the next meeting, you actually brought maps that showed, right, if you were to compare this area to Robbinswood Park and another neighborhood park, here's what that size would look like. Because I think that it's helpful to give that visual for folks to get an idea of that. And so I really appreciate that work. And I think that all of the meetings were full rooms, so the ability to actually engage in a way where everyone had an opportunity to be heard in a respectful way, I think is really important, so I thank you for that. I really like where this has ended up. I think that the community has worked together to give us the feedback to get to this, so I'm excited about that. I have a couple of questions. One is on the adventure-themed playground area. Is that going to be universal design so that all abilities will be able to play?
Yes, all of our playgrounds have at least some components or some elements that will be fully accessible. I don't know at this point, not having designed it, whether it will be fully accessible, but for sure, some components will certainly be accessible.
Yeah, because when Councilmember Robinson was talking about Crossroads Park, when I was there recently, I noticed the merry-go-round now is universal
Right.
Accessibility, which I like. I would also echo the exercise equipment for adults and seniors. I think that, if our budget can fit some modest stations, I think that would be a good thing. And I also like the idea of starting that to look at off-leash areas. I think we have more and more population, more dogs. I understand Amazon the workers also have a lot of dogs, so making sure that there is that space for our furry friends. And then on the trail expansion part, I appreciate the fact that we're going to look at the environmental design and crime prevention, because as I think about the expansion down to the park and ride, as we look at bus rapid transit and reconfiguring that exit 9 park and ride, I can potentially, there may be more people going up the hill to their homes, and so the ability to have that safe space going up and down the hillside will be really important. So anyway, I really like where this is. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lee.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for all these years of service. Yeah, we are very fortunate to have you. And
Thank you.
And you and I run into each other a lot, I mean.
A lot of hallway
Everywhere there's a
conversations.
park, big or small, whatever size, anything to do with construction, you are involved. And if you were here, talk to the economic development consultant, we talk about how lucky we are in Bellevue. And we talk about people, how important it is. And one thing I ignored to say that we did not mention dogs. Dogs is our man's best friend, right? So I think they are part of our quality of life for our community. And you play a big role in it, of the things, not just building something, but you have to take care of the community, the people that own dogs, don't own dogs, that enjoy the space, share the space. We're all involved, we're together. So I think it's due to the balance and sensitivity our staff have, and you obviously have gone through all that stuff. So the result has been, very good. So we've been fortunate, lucky, and blessed that we have such a great, space, environment, and all that. So thank you, and good luck to you.
Thank you.
Enjoy your time ahead of you. Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Great. Councilmember Stokes, also a former member of the Parks Board.
Yeah, I really appreciate and echo all the comments made by my colleagues on this. It's really neat to get to this point after a lot of work and typical of what we do on these things. I remember, and we're going to miss you. I can't.
Everybody's replaceable.
Well, yeah, but there's some other comebacks to that, but that's okay. We will miss you. I remember very well my first day, I think, on the Parks Board, or somewhere close to that. You took us up to what was going to be Maidenbar Park, and it was a long time ago. We walked around, and there was this one apartment building that was there, and I said, well, gee, that thing's kind of intruding here. Can't we buy that? Can we do something with it? And you said, just take it easy. We will. One thing we have you learn in parks, the one thing we have on our side is time. And we will get there, And I've always remembered that. But your ability to not only get these things done, but to work with people on that. And same thing with, working on Surrey Downs Park. Went through a lot with that, and that was just amazing, the outcome. And the other one that was interesting too was the Airfield Park, that piece. So I remember a lot of that, and I think that's what is consistent with all that is what we're doing tonight. It's always a thorough process, inclusion, a lot of work. Sometimes it takes forever, it seems like. But I think that what is really important on this is that when we get down to a certain point, we make good decisions on this. And having been on the Parks Board for 3 years, I thoroughly appreciate the Parks Board and how it operates. And they did a great job. And my first inclination is, we always, ask questions and things, but if the Parks Board has brought it to us, the chances are it's pretty darn good. And in this case, I think it's just an amazing output that the staff and the Parks Board have gotten together on. And, we're policy people, and they're the ones who take that overall policy and make it work. And they've done this in this case, and just amazing. So thank you very much, and looking forward to having this brought back and vote on it and having it done and going to the celebration in July or so?
Can't guarantee that.
Maybe
How
September.
about November?
Okay.
That's good timing. Mr. Neuenhuis.
Thank you. Glenn, I'll echo, thank you so much for your 18 years of service to the city. I won't embarrass you and keep going. Okay, what a great servant you've been in the city, so thank you so much, and really appreciate the hard work of the Parks Board on this too. I heard there was a lot of good, robust discussion, and really appreciate it because it sounds like the process worked. And I'd love to hear that great, robust discussion at boards and commissions, as well as the Newport Hills community. I think it was really important, and it sounds like you did a lot of robust outreach, so I really appreciate that as well. I had one question regarding this community involvement heat map, though. Does this also encompass the online surveys, or was this just people who signed in and showed up at the events?
This is reflective of just the people on September 24th who signed in.
Okay.
So now, what I can also say is that we didn't do a heat map for the July 23rd meeting. It would look virtually identical to that.
Okay.
But this is actually the September 24th. So,
this is just September 24th?
Right.
Okay.
So all those dots represent the 51 addresses that we had on the sign-in sheet.
Okay.
There were 2 addresses that were not from Newport Hills. They're not on that map.
Okay.
There were 2 non-Newport Hill addresses.
Gotcha. But looking at in our packet here, the vast majority of the survey or the responses we got was from that online survey responses, correct? Do we have any idea where those
No, we have
responses?
no way of determining where they came from. It's a survey monkey, and we don't have that technology.
Okay.
Or if we do, I don't know anything about it.
Okay. Next question was on this park itself. Just to give, and I appreciate Councilmember Robertson giving us some background on this, but I was just curious, was this always designated as an off-leash area? And then
No.
It was not always, okay.
No,
Okay.
it's been used, it was used almost from the outset of when the city acquired it back in 2010.
Mm-hmm.
It's been used as an unofficial off-leash area.
Unofficial?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, I too would be interested in seeing kind of what our our master plan is for off-leash areas in the city. I think this is going to be the second one right next to Robinswood Park. So, is there plans? Where else do we need off-leash park areas? Councilmember Lee said, man's best friend, and we are seeing more people with dogs. So I think it's an important quality of life issue. So I think that would be interesting. I think for me and my colleagues to see what kind of the long-term plans are for off-leash areas. But I also endorse the adult exercise equipment. I think that's great, and also the loop trail safety. I'm glad to hear that we're taking steps there as well. So thank you.
Again, thanks, Glenn. It was nice to be able to chat a little bit this morning in the mayor's meeting. You've done remarkable work and left a great imprint on the city. The planning process used for this This was short of a master plan process. So can you explain very quickly a little bit of the difference between those two and why this was used and where else we've used these?
The outreach for this is not dissimilar to a master plan, although because this is a neighborhood park, I would say the best comparison of this would be the Bridle Trails park that we did just a couple of years ago, the corner park.
The corner?
Very similar.
In terms of the process?
And the process was very similar, community meetings, similar outreach, similar participation, similar process with the park board and the council. What we try to do here that differs from like a large master plan, and I'll use some master plan comparisons, would be Downtown Park, Maidenbower Bay would be a master plan, Crossroads Park would be a master plan. We would employ master plans when we suspect or know for a fact that this is going to be a long-term project, multiple phases, multiple budgets. Downtown Park, we all remember, is 27 years, and Maidenbower, we're going on 30 years and will be more. Smaller parks like this and bridle trails are, I'll call it one-shot deals. And what we try to do is plan and develop, and we're done. And therefore, what we do, the beauty of the master plan, and we go through a full planning exercise, full planning level SEPA, because that gives the community the knowledge of what that space is going to be, even though it might only be half done or a third done. They'll have knowledge of what our vision is for the whole site. And so therefore, that's the beauty of a master plan and a full environmental review during the planning process. In this case, we'll do an environmental review as part of the project, the actual design. And therefore, we want to move quickly into design so we can actually get them apart sooner rather than later, knowing that we can. And it's, like I said, one stop. And there is no multiple phases and multiple budget years. And we've found that to be successful. And frankly, to do a full-on master plan with SEPA is frankly pretty frustrating for the community. They go, well, why are you doing this? Why is it taking, it's already taken longer than we thought it should. Why would you have to spend another 6 to 12 months going through another planning level SEPA? So we've used this pretty effectively, and I think the community has endorsed moving quickly on this. So that's that. So I would say Bridle Trails is probably the best example of the more recent history.
Okay. No one process is ever completely alike, right?
Correct.
Yes. Been through a number of these. The connection by trail to 116th Avenue Southeast, specifically for the residents along there, how do they feel about that? And the need for it, I presume, is because it's a long way to go around to get
It would be a long way to go around the school site, but we've got approval from the school district to formalize that trail. We have not only no pushback from the residents along there, but we had strong endorsement from the community for loop trails and multiple access points, and so there was support for that.
Okay. Well, I would agree with the need to take a look for more dog-centric areas. Could be off-leash, could be on-leash, kind of how that would balance out. Right now, part of the downtown on-leash dog area or dog use is my parking strip. So I get out there before I mow. And I think that it is something that's missing. There's one point I really do want to make, and I think you were really clear about talking about having a general use area and an OLA. 100% of this park is a people park. Mm-hmm. We don't build parks for dogs because there are very few that are going to wander down there on their own, open up the gate, go in, chase the ball around, reopen the gate, and wander home.
I'm not a dog owner, so I'll be the first to admit, but one of the things I've learned through this process and others is that this is as much a social area for humans and for dog owners as it is for the dogs. Dogs love it, yes, but so do the dog owners.
Right.
It's truly a social place.
I would agree with you. I guess as the owner of 9 pounds of fury, I can say that that darn thing can figure out how to open up gates. I know it can't be because I left them unlocked. Thank you very much for the work. I think we look forward to seeing this go forward. I really look forward to this opening in November, and I'd be happy to come up there and stand way in the background. November-ish.
Yeah, ish.
Okay.
When are we going to name this park?
We haven't got there. That's one more thing that we
I know
need to
that's
ask.
council, something we need to do.
We
but yeah.
will be back sometime next year before we open the park,
Okay.
so that we actually can put the name on the sign. So yeah, sometime about mid-year, we'll come back
Great.
after we get some feedback from the neighborhood about what they'd like to name it.
Okay, so we're now going to recess into executive session. The council's added this executive session at the end of the study session to address one matter of potential litigation. Executive session is pursuant to RCW 423110 sub 1 sub I. Executive session will last approximately 15 minutes, hopefully 10, so that we have 5 minutes before we start up at 8 o'clock. Thank you. I will call to order the meeting of the Bellevue City Council. This is our regular session for Monday, December 2nd, 2019. Will the clerk please call roll?
Mayor Chalmers.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Robinson.
Here.
Councilmember Lee.
Here.
Councilmember Neuenhouse.
Here.
Councilmember Robertson.
Present.
Councilmember Stokes.
Here.
Councilmember Zong.
Here.
Mr. Lee, would you lead us in the flag
Thank you.
salute?
Please rise. I pledge
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
and
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So we have a couple of changes to make on the agenda for tonight. We do want to add one item under the city manager's report that will relate to item 8G, which is the AMI contract amendment. I'd also like us to move item 10A to the end of the meeting. And that will allow Councilmember Robertson, who is recused from that, to be able to head home early or do whatever else she happens to want to do. So with those two changes, I would entertain a motion to adopt the amendment, adopt the agenda as amended.
I move that we approve the amended agenda.
Second.
Moved and seconded to approve the amended agenda. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. We are ready for communication, written and oral. You have 3 minutes to speak to the City Council. If you are unfamiliar with speaking to the council, just come down to the front, give us your name and address. When the green light comes on, you're on the timer. The 3 minutes will continue. You'll be able to see the yellow light at 1 minute. And when the red light comes on, we ask that you end at that point in time. I believe we have 4 people signed up to speak tonight, and we'll just move right to the clerk, who will call the speakers.
The first speaker this evening is Emmanuel Solis.
So Emmanuel Solis, 2447 161st Avenue Northeast, Bellevue, Washington. Dear council members, I just wanted to follow up on our November 4th study session regarding the comprehensive plan amendment process. Now it's Ordinance 6495. During the study session, council deviated from the staff and planning commission recommendation and introduced a less effective proposal when talking about repeated CPI applications. Residents and attorneys representing the developers testified during the Planning Commission public hearing and all were in favor of the staff recommendation, including the 3-year application limit. We believe there's no basis for concerns raised during the City Council study session. The current process already has a 3-year limit, a 3-year application limit as well. So the goal of the process change is to close that loophole that allows applications to withdraw their application before council vote, and thus allow them to tweak it and repeat that application. Note that 35% of the applications in the CPI were withdrawn by the applicant before the decision was made. CPAs are requests that change the city vision for growth. The bar should be very high for these applications. If you let the developers drive, then the outcome of growth is likely not what you have matched. It will not match the city or the vision or the intent. The upper timeline that you see on that piece of paper shows the 11 repeated CPA applications since 2008. CPA data indicates that if you retroactively apply the 2-year limitation as it has been proposed by the council, you will only have prevented 2 applications in the last 12 years. Therefore, the current proposal to have a 2-year ban will only ratify the status quo and will not have any meaningful impact. On the contrary, if you apply the 3-year initial proposed application, you would see that you would actually have the intended effect, and you would have prevented 5 of the repeated applications. I hope this data clarifies that there's no reason to be concerned about a too restrictive of a process if you apply this 3-year limitation. So we respectfully ask you to reconsider the 3-year limitation as proposed by the staff and unanimously recommended by the Planning Commission. Once again, be driven by the vision, the data, and not by fear. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
The next speaker is Randy Gaddy.
Hi, I'm Randy Gaddy. I live at 7242 Lakemont Boulevard Southeast, Bellevue. I'm here to express my opposition to the Park Point Planned Unit Development, file number 19121-109-LL. I've lived at our address. My wife and I have lived at our address for over 35 years now. This proposed land use PUD is going to be developed on approximately 8.3 acres, and I oppose it for several different reasons. One of the reasons is this part of the Lakemont. It's at the very end of Lakemont. This is old coal mining country. Has historical value as far as the history of the coal mines that used to be run and operated in this area. Also, it was in the early 90s, a company by the name of Quadrant tried to develop the property directly behind us, which is directly across the street from the proposed development. And they ran into the coal mine shafts were so close to the surface they weren't able to develop on top of the coal mine shafts. Also ran into an awful lot of stream corridors, wetlands, in other words. And they tried cluster development as this Isola Homes is also proposing. Finally, after 5 years of trying to develop this property, they pulled out and sold it to the King County Park System, which is now the King County Regional Wildland Park. There's for our area, there's no other property like this around. It's probably the last undeveloped piece of property. It's located very close to the Bellevue. It's the Coal Creek Bellevue Parks, which is going to be right behind this proposed development. And also across the street is the Cougar Mountain Wildland Regional Park. And so they're proposing 35 houses to be put on 8.3 acres. So that's just really going to destroy the whole, the whole feel of this area as being wild and scenic. And also, once the historical value is destroyed, then that part of our history goes away. And also one of our great concerns is the fact that there's no water or sewer down there. We're all on septic. And our well, which supplies 3 houses on our side of the road, is going to be within 200 feet of this proposed development. So we're very concerned once they start moving soil around, how it's going to affect our well. So thank you for listening.
Great, thank you very much, Mr. Gaddy.
The next speaker is Dana Gaddy.
I'm Dana Gaddy. I live with Randy, the same 7242 Lakemont Boulevard. And I'm opposed for the same reasons. This property is very small, but critical for a wildland corridor. If you look at a map, it's really a long swath, and it'll cut right through this property. And so, where are they gonna go? I mean, we have deer, bear, bobcat, coyotes. I hear the coyotes almost nightly, and I just, I just don't want this feel of our area to go away, and it will. And there's 250 signatures that are being collected around the area. Nobody wants this. They're worried about traffic and sensitive wetlands, and there's 4 different fish-bearing streams. And of course the coal mines, what my husband talked about. There's a roadway that it's steep slopes and guardrails, and often traps young animals. And the oncoming cars, the posted speed limit is 40, and it's I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's a very sharp turn to the golf course. I mean, coming to the golf course, Newcastle golf course. And so, the traffic, sometimes I can't even get across the street to get the mail, and I don't know. It's just gonna get worse because it's, Lakemont is a major highway. So, thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Gaddy.
The final speaker under oral comes is Heidi Dean.
Good evening, Council. My name is Heidi Dean. I live at 11661 Southeast 56th Street in Newport Hills. And I bet you thought I was going to talk about the park planning process, and I'll just email you about that. I do want to point out, though, that on your website, it does say that Bridle Trails went through a master planning process, so which that they said in the study session that they didn't. What I did want to say was I was really glad that I was here tonight to listen to the economic development update. That's something that's kind of near and dear to my heart, having been through the whole thing and learned a lot about econ development with the shopping center up in Newport Hills. I poked Mr. McCommon and said, hey, good job hiring these fellows, because I was really, really impressed with what they had to say. I'd been there for the first update this year where they, Mr. Canedo and Ms. Marsh had talked about they'd gone to different, well, I don't want to call them a convention, but they'd been to different things throughout the United States, and one of them had been for shopping centers. And I remember sitting in the audience thinking, did you ask about Newport Hills? Did you look to see if there was anybody there that could, address Newport Hills that might be interested in us? And I didn't hear anything. But what I heard tonight, I was really happy with. I liked their number 2 focus on explore opportunities to support small business, and their number 3 support more robust retail activity. And I also liked the council's objectives about retaining diverse local business and supporting the retail activity. Because, and Councilmember Robertson made the point about what, as we start to get more of these large businesses in, we're seeing the loss of small businesses, essential services. And I've often wondered, it's very exciting, let's take, for example, the Bell Red corridor. What's going to happen to all of those small businesses? Where are they going to go? What are we going to do about that? So I'm hoping that as we look at economic development, we start to think about that. But I was also really glad to hear about thinking about diversifying with tech, because I don't know how many of you know, my household is run on tech money. My husband's a software engineer, hence my email name. But it's really scary when that tech boom busts. We've been through it. And so one of the things that I don't see here in Bellevue is medical technology. My husband works for Stryker, which they do defibrillators. He previously worked for Sonosite doing ultrasounds, portable ultrasounds. So that's one thing. As people age, the medical technology is never going to go away. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I believe that is the end of the... Yes, that's the end of those who have signed up. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak to the council tonight on this? We do have a public hearing and someone is signed up to speak on that. Okay, seeing none, we will continue on we do not have reports of community councils, boards, and commissions. A report of the city manager, we did add on the agenda some information regarding the AMI contract, which is on the consent agenda for tonight. So if we can launch into that, I'd appreciate it.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. As you mentioned, we do have one item under the manager's report related to an update on the AMI contracting process. This item, as you mentioned, is HG currently on your consent calendar. Joining us this evening is Novel from our Utilities Department, and joining her is Brian Bartels, the Utilities Deputy Director, to provide us with that update. Nav?
Thank you, Mr. Miyake. Good evening, Mayor Chalmana, council members. As Mr. Miyake mentioned, you have a contract amendment on the consent agenda for advanced metering infrastructure, also known as AMI. So this is not a new project. It was a capital project that you approved in the 2017-18 budget. And in December of 2018, you approved a contract with Itron, our vendor of choice. So over the last several months, we have been working with Itron to work out the details of that implementation. In that process, we've learned that both the project costs and the project schedule will need to be adjusted, largely due to the expanded scope of the communications network that's needed to implement AMI and the permit requirements for installing that network. Given these new developments, this was an opportunity for staff and Itron to look at alternatives to building that new network, new communications network. And so one of the technologies we looked at was the cellular technology. So at this point, we had two paths in front of us. One was continue with installing our own communications network technology that was originally anticipated in the AMI contract. This requires that the city and Itron to build and operate and maintain a private communication network across the city. Because of the topography of our city, the number of pole-mounted collectors required in order for the network to be effective would increase from 39 that we had included in the contract to more than 56. So this was going to require an amendment to the contract and would increase the contract from 20.2 to 21.7. Now that does include $500,000 in contingency, which we really should have included in the contract to begin with, given that this is a per unit contract, so any additional units, any additional meters added would increase the cost of the contract. So another option in front of us was to employ existing cellular communications for AMI. The use of cellular technology was evaluated when we did the original business case analysis, but it wasn't considered cost effective at that time. Since then, technological advances in battery life, combined with the favorable rates that Itron is offering us for making this viable, that's what's making this a viable option for us. And in fact, more cost effective than continuing with the original technology that we were anticipating. So the contract with Itron would need to be adjusted from $20.2 million to $21.1 million for cellular option, and that also includes $500,000 in contingency. This is still about $600,000 less than option one, proceeding with the original plan of building our own communications network. So bottom line, either option requires a contract amendment to increase the contract amount. Both options will have a positive net present value, and that was anticipated in the original business case analysis, and it will be more cost effective than continuing with our current manual meter reading operations, and definitely it will enhance customer functionality and value. We have briefed our Environmental Services Commission a couple of times, most recently in November, on these developments. So right now, the contract amendment you have in front of you includes option two, the use of cellular technology. Like I said, it's cheaper than option one and is forward compatible technology, and it does not require the city to build and maintain network devices on street poles installed throughout our service area. With this in mind, you have an AMI contract amendment on the consent agenda for tonight.
Okay, great, thank you. Councilmember Nieuwenhuis and Councilmember Zahn. Councilmember Nieuwenhuis as liaison to Environmental Services. It was Councilmember Zahn who asked that we have this broken out tonight, but did you have anything that you wanted to add from this?
Yeah, on a few words. First of all, I think it's really great work on behalf of staff to see this and being able to shift when this technology had advanced, and this was a better option for the city. Also really appreciate the great work that the Environmental Services Commission did. They really took a deep dive, taking a look at the positives and the drawbacks as they were presented, and really took a deep dive, and really appreciate them signing off on this as well. But as was just demonstrated to us and just said to us, it really does make sense. I mean, the fact that we no longer have to build, operate, and maintain that network anymore, there will be cost savings around that. It's going to be less impact to the community. No network pole construction, no visual clutter, no collectors attached to poles. Certainly think residents will be appreciative of that. So no longer coordinating and having to install on PSE poles as well. So, and this cellular technology is already the next iteration of the Riva technology and software, which has already been purchased. So it's forward compatible with future cellular generations as well. So this is not something that we're going to have to replace anytime soon. And then the big piece about the batteries now having a 20-year, is that right? No, I'm sorry, 20-year life. So this really makes sense on multiple different levels, and I really appreciate staff making this shift to find a better solution for residents as well as the city of Bellevue.
Councilmember Zahn, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Actually, I was just interested in making sure that we actually highlighted the fact that we shifted gears and we've come up with this better solution. It seemed to warrant more than just a vote in the consent calendar, and so I appreciated hearing from you as well as Councilmember Nieuwenhuis. Thank you.
Any other Councilmember Lee?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm really glad to hear the liaison, Councilmember Nieuwenhuis, having to say that this is an improvement, a better alternative. When I look at this, of course, not knowing all the ins and outs of the technology, I thought that the original design was based on new technology, and so we were moving forward on the new technology. But for some reason, the new technology is proven not to be practical. As a result, we are moving back to the old technology. And because it's practical, feasible now, because we are getting more battery life and other attributes. At the same time, it has all the things that Councilmember Nguyen has mentioned, which is a good thing to do. So I'm concerned is, what happened to the new technology? Are we foregoing some of the technology advantages that we may want to get to eventually in the future, or what? Or is that going to be not even something that would be appropriate? Are we going to be able to live with this technology we're using now as we move forward? I don't want to go for a few more years, suddenly say, gee, we're going to go to the new stuff, and then we're going to go through this over. So that's my question, if you understand it.
Right. So this is actually newer technology than building our own communications network.
Okay.
And so this is more forward-thinking, and this will actually maximize the return on our new AMI system.
So this technology wasn't available when we started looking into using AMI system, but now it's become available.
Precisely.
Something we can
It was
use.
actually cellular technology has been in play for a while, and ITRON itself has, I think, about 300 million connections. 3 million, sorry, not 300 million, 3 million on cellular. But what was not in play was a 20-year life. Up till now, it was a useful life was around 10, for battery life was about 10 years. Okay. So now what has evolved is that now you have battery life lasting 20 years.
Okay.
And that's what makes it economical now.
Okay, so if it had been the case, you would probably chosen this system to
Exactly.
begin with.
Yes.
And so in a way, you demonstrated your flexibility, adaptability to get into something that's actually better.
Better and more
Okay.
cost-effective,
All right.
yes.
You made your case. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. Thank you very much for the briefing. Thank you for bringing this up, council members, on so that we could have a little more explanation of it. We will now, and that's the last. We don't have anything else under the your report.
That's correct.
Okay, we're going to move now to council business and new initiatives. Both Councilmember Lee and Councilmember Zahn have been asked to be recognized for maybe less than 2 minutes to talk about two different recognitions. Okay. Councilmember Lee.
Thank you. As we all just celebrated Thanksgiving, we have something to thank for, which is someone in our community, a very respected resident and citizen, Steve Poole. He's probably the best dressed TV celebrity in our region. That's why I'm dressed up with my tie and nice jacket. Anyway, he has been a great weatherman for television Como. And he has lived in the city for that many years. And he just retired, after 40 years of service. And besides being a first-class weatherman, very professional, he has been a tremendous citizen for our community. He's been involved with contributing, emceeing many community courses, charities, and events, and so on. So I think we just want to recognize all his 40 years of service. I want to extend our gratitude to him and wish him a very, very great and enjoyable retirement.
I understand he's running for city council, but
That'd be
that's
great.
no.
He would be a great mayor for our city.
Oh, great. Councilmember Zahn.
Yeah, so I just wanted to note that at the Seahawks game today, they were giving recognition to the Chinese Americans who served in World War II. And that was something that earlier in the year, Councilmember Lee had worked on getting a proclamation. And so since we're here instead of at the game, I thought I would bring that up because I think it's important to acknowledge our veterans who aren't always acknowledged. That's it.
Great. Thank you very much for both of those. We'll now move on to the consent calendar. Is there a motion on consent?
I move that we approve the consent calendar.
Second.
Moved and seconded to approve the consent calendar. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The consent calendar is approved. We now have a public hearing, and You just had to do this. Put another easement on the agenda just for me. I appreciate it. And this one isn't even in Bellevue. It's down in Medina, I think, if I'm doing the addresses correct. So we will we'll have a staff report on this, a motion to open the public hearing. I believe there's one person at least who has signed up to speak at the public hearing. Offer the opportunity for more, and then we will go to council discussion and possible action.
Thanks, Mayor. I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to Patty Ebert, our senior real property agent, for a real quick, brief staff report prior to opening of the public hearing.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. Tonight, we're doing a public hearing for a release of a sewer easement at 8426 Overlake Drive West in Medina. Tonight's public hearing is to allow the public an opportunity to comment on this release. The property owner of 8418 and 8426, they own both lots. They are building a tennis court on the lot 8418, the upper lot, and there's an existing sewer easement that goes right across this property also. It serves two properties above this property. The property owner has installed a new side sewer to replace this one and has removed the old one. A new private sewer easement has been executed and recorded. And the two sewer easements shown in red, which is very hard to see, it's the one that goes right across the middle of the properties, those are no longer needed. Following the staff report and public hearing, the staff will request council action on the proposed resolution authorizing the release of the sewer easements. This ends our staff report. Did you have any questions for us?
Are there any questions for staff? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to open the public hearing.
I move that we open the public hearing.
Second.
Moved and seconded to open the public hearing. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries and the public hearing is open. Would the clerk please call the individual who has signed up to speak? And again, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. I am really going to guess that this is a person who hasn't been here before, but that may not be the case. So come to the podium, give your name and address, speak for 3 minutes, and when the red light comes on, if you would just wrap that up, we would appreciate it. But if you would just call the name
Ben Thorne.
Good evening, council members. My name's Ben Thorne. I'm here to represent the Simonis tonight. I live at 8710 Overlake Drive West in Medina. I'm the estate manager and facilities manager for the Simonis. And I was just here to listen to the hearing and see if there were any comments, and so that I could explain what we're doing and if I need to elaborate on the easement. But it seems like it's all in order, so I'd just like to thank you, and thank you for the speedy processing of the easement relinquishment, and the whole process was really well handled, and we're very grateful. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for coming down tonight and speaking. Is there anybody else in the audience who wishes to speak who did not sign up? I am seeing none, so I'd entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
I move that we close the public hearing.
Second. Moved and seconded to close the public hearing. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously to close the public hearing. Are there any questions that council members have on this? Council Member Lee.
Thank you. I do have a question. I noticed that the map you show, you relinquish this easement, but then you're putting a new easement. So does the same easement serve both properties?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. So what is the, just looking at the map, by rerouting the easement the way it shows, what difference did it make to serve the two properties?
The difference is the property that's being redeveloped, my mouse will not work up there. Where the existing easement is at, that's where they're putting their tennis court. And they can't put anything on the surface where there's an easement because you wouldn't be able to access the line. And so they've rerouted it around the outside of the property.
how does it affect the other property? The other property owners satisfied with it?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
no
they've
problem.
executed an easement agreement with the Simones, and they live up above, so it's the flow that's going down, and they get the same service.
Okay, thank you.
Deputy Mayor?
Well, I have a question. I'm not an engineer, but you're taking a straight line and you're turning it into something that has quite a number of angles. Does that affect the performance of the sewage line? And if there's any backup, would the city be held responsible?
This,
Go ahead, I'm
oh,
here. Hi.
oh, hi there. My backup is here. I was just going to say, this is a private easement, and so the maintenance responsibility is on the property owner.
Okay.
Anybody else? Seeing none, if the pleasure of the council is to approve this, I would entertain a motion to adopt Resolution 9699.
I think it's actually ordinance, isn't it 6494?
Did I get the wrong one?
I moved.
I did.
I move that we
My
approve ordinance 6494.
No, you're on
I'm
the wrong
wrong?
one. Resolution
Sorry.
9699 is the easement.
All right, so be it.
I move to approve Resolution 9699.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded to approve 9699. The only time I was wrong was when I thought I was wrong. So that is before us. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion 9699 is adopted unanimously. Thank you very much. Thank you, staff, for the good work and the good report. And also appreciate the kudos to how this process worked. So we do appreciate that. We like to hear that. We are going to move item 10A to the end of the meeting, which is the ordinance that relates to the South Bellevue segment of the Energize East Side project. And then we're going to, right now, handle the other ordinances, resolutions, and motions. And these are, for the most part, they are adopting the budget. What I would hope we can do, I know at least a couple of members want to speak to some of the items, so maybe we can identify those after we've had a staff report regarding its 6 actions that we'll take regarding the mid-buy adjustment. Okay, so let's.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. This is related to the 2019-2020 mid-biennium budget. And here this evening to give us some highlights of each one of the ordinances is Tony Call, our director of our Finance and Asset Management Department. And as you mentioned, once she gives that overall presentation, then we'll be asking the council to take action on each one of the 6 ordinances related to the biennium budget. Tony.
Thank you, City Manager Miyake. Mayor, Deputy Mayor, council members, it's a pleasure back here this evening. You do have 6 actions before you in order to adopt the mid-biennium. The first 3 of the ordinance in front of you are all fee-related. Development services fee update, fire inspection fee update, and transportation impact fee update. Development services was before you with Director Brennan on November 4th. Chief Hagan and Fire Marshal Ken Carlson were here on November 12th. And then on November 18th, as well as November 25th, Director Singolakis and Eric Miller were here to discuss transportation impact fees. In order to adopt the budget, you will need to set the property tax levy amount for 2020. And so the next 2 actions after the first 3 for fees are all about the property tax. Ordinance 6492 will set the property tax levy amount for 2020, and it does include a 1% adjustment. That 1% adjustment will cost a homeowner of a $936,000 median home approximately $8 annually. The rate will actually decrease from 92 cents to 90 cents in 2020 with that increase. The Resolution 9700 is banking the excess property tax that's available at the county. And then the final ordinance before you is Ordinance 6493, which is actually what we consider the umbrella ordinance. And it will appropriate the 2019-2020 mid-biennium by fund. It also modifies the 2019-25 CIP plan and sets the pay plans for 2020. As a reminder, the mid-buy adjustments are primarily technical in nature. It adjusts personnel costs, corrects errors, adapts the impact from the state legislature for new resources for affordable housing. It makes slight increases in police, 2 personnel. It adjusts for Bellevue's portion of 2 personnel for ART, which is the Coalition for Regional Housing. And it adds 6 personnel to development services to address continued demand for urbanization and growth. And so there are 6 actions before you in order to adopt the mid-buy. With that, Mayor, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you. I know last week Councilmember Lee mentioned that he might wish to speak to the ordinance that sets the property tax. That's 6492. So I would allow him to speak to that. Others may also wish to speak to that. I don't know. I may wish to speak to that after Mr. Lee. Is there anyone? We had quite the robust discussion about the impact fees. Is there anyone who wants to do anything with that? Or speak to it. I'm seeing none. Any of the other ones other than potentially the adoption of the mid-buy that people wish to speak to or offer amendments? I am seeing none. So let's begin. The first ordinance is the ordinance regarding development services, development service fees. We've had a number of briefings on this. These fees are being adjusted consistent with what we have done over the past several years. So I would entertain a motion for adopting ordinance 6489.
I move that we adopt ordinance 6489.
Second.
Okay, so ordinance 6489 that sets the development fees for next year has been moved and seconded. There appears to be no further discussion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries on 7-0 vote. Move to ordinance 6490. This ordinance amends our code related to fire inspection fees and establishing an effective date.
I move that we approve ordinance 6490.
Second.
So moved and seconded to approve ordinance 6490. I am not seeing anyone who wishes to discuss that. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say no. Motion carries on a unanimous 7-0 vote. We're at ordinance 6491. This is one that approves the 2020 transportation impact fee rate schedules. I would entertain a motion to place that before us.
Move that we pass ordinance 6491.
Second.
Moved and seconded to pass 6491. Again, no one seems wishes to speak specifically to this ordinance. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries on a 7-0 vote. We're at ordinance 6492. This ordinance establishes the amount of property taxes to be levied for the year 2020, the second year of the City of Bellevue's 2019-2020 fiscal biennium. I'm going to ask that you move it and place it before us, and then Councilmember Lee can speak.
Move that we pass ordinance 6492.
Second.
Moved and seconded to pass ordinance 6492. Councilmember Lee, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and fellow council members. As I have always been speaking against a property tax increase without specific reason, with specific purpose designated, with voter approval, because I believe that our property tax burden has been increasing, quite substantially, and we have actually been able to keep up with our need for revenue by having the property tax values going up. So our percentage property tax, net tax, the tax itself, the revenue we generate, is actually increasing without having to increase on the percentage of the tax rate. That's one thing. Now, I would want to be sure that we understand that. I don't want to get into the custom that, well, we are allowed to increase tax by 1% by law. As a result, we automatically increase it. I know this is not the case here. We try to justify it, and I believe the staff has done a great job. And we believe the taxes to make sure that we keep up with the reserve that we have established as a goal, but it's sometime in the future. So I have some number two reasons. One is we don't really need to anticipate that revenues dropping off. We will probably, sometime in the future, we will be able to raise our taxes to meet our demands as we get there. I think that's the reason, because we don't have any anticipated need for spending that money. Second, I want to be sure that we have a discussion that any tax increase doesn't just automatically get passed, but we have a understanding, reason for some, from my perspective, have an opportunity to speak on this subject. So, which I've done that, so I would continue my not voting for the property tax increase of 1% for the reason I stated. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? Councilmember Robertson.
Thank you. I appreciate my colleague, Councilmember Lee, and always being the budget hawk and looking out. But in this case, I have to respectfully disagree. The city has been very responsible about our budgeting and about our tax levies. It's so much so, in fact, that we have ordinance or resolution 9700 where we're banking levy capacity of almost $9 million. That's $9 million that we could raise taxes and it would go forward every year. That's how often we have not raised taxes to the maximum extent allowed by law, because we really do care about making sure that we're fiscally responsible. We have needs, particularly in our public safety, to add police officers and to plan for bringing Fire Station 10 online. And when you look at the out years on revenues expected to come in and expenses, even if we don't add a single new government service to our growing city, the expenses will outpace revenues in a couple of years. And this is one way to make sure that we continue to build towards that future. I would also point out that I just looked up the Consumer Price Index for the Seattle area, and over the last 12 months, that went up 2.2%. This is going up 1%. So it's not even keeping up with inflation, because unlike other taxes, property taxes don't go up by the way that the value of the property goes up. They are levied at a set amount, and that set amount goes up 1% even if property values go up 10%. So that's why property taxes have become an increasingly small portion of the revenue that the city brings in. Fortunately, we have all this economic development that's bringing in B&O and sales tax and other revenue, so that property taxes can remain low. And I would also point out that even with this increase, our property tax millage rate, which is the cents per thousand, is still going down. It's a reduction. It's just a little bit smaller of a reduction than it would have been without the 1%. So I do support this. This was also part of our budgetary plan for last year. And it's part of making sure that our city remains in good financial state in the years ahead. So I support it as a responsible thing to do. Thank you.
I too support it as the responsible thing to do, and I do want to make sure that people understand what this goes for. There's a gentleman in a white shirt sitting in the back. He is our fire chief. In a few years, we will be opening a new fire station. That fire station, I believe, will require 14 new firefighters. So rather than wait until we get to that, which I think is 21 or 22, somewhere in there, so not too far away, this increase helps balance off where we will flatline out through the area where we will not be putting enough into our reserves. So I see this very much as related to public safety. I also see it as very much related to good budgeting. And I do want to make sure that people understand, and most people never believe this, the property tax, the amount of money that Bellevue collects from the property tax does not increase because the assessment has gone up. It's actually a very simple formula that stays exactly the same in terms of the amount of revenue that can be raised, unless we do this 1%, which is the maximum that we can do. What does add to the revenue is new construction. And I think the city is also always very vigilant about looking. So if that new construction in the future is coming much faster than we thought, there may be able to be an adjustment that's made. However, our finance director has also done a study that shows that if you're building a large building like a 300,000 square foot office building with, maybe some retail in it, that yes, indeed, that growth pays for that growth during that construction period and for a little while after that. But after that, the services that are needed to serve that use, they go up, and we need to provide more revenue. So for those reasons, I will be voting in support. Mr. Stokes?
Yeah, just a couple of points. I agree with my two colleagues who just spoke. I think it is important to recognize that this raising of this tax this year was not automatic. We're not in an automatic pilot on this. We consider it very carefully, and we will always do that. And I think that needs to be made clear. Secondly, it is a serious matter that we're looking forward in the future revenues at our current rate, all the current factors, and we will reach a point not too far in the future where reserves will go down, and that has all kinds of problems for the city. And we can't wait till we get there and then make it up. So the prudent thing is to do this very, very slight increase will help keep us on that trajectory. It's really not going to make it not go down completely, but it will have a great effect positively on that. So for those reasons, I think it's a very rational, prudent thing to do for the city and provide those services that this city and the people in the city want. So I support it wholly.
Ms. Zahn?
Yes, so I support it as well, and as I look out there, I see the other gentleman in uniform, which when I think about fiscal responsibility, I think about the police study and the fact that we could have asked for a lot more officers right now in our budget, but we were only asking for a couple as we kind of assess the situation. But as we assess the situation and look at an increase in resources, we want to make sure that we actually have the budget to do that, because earlier today, we talked about environmental design for crime prevention, and yet that is only one element. Actually having people and resources in the community is important, and I think it's actually in all of our departments as we continue to have more parks and more people here and light rail coming and the fire station, that these are going to require resources, and I think that we need to be forward-thinking, and so I very much support the modest 1%.
Is there anybody else who wishes to speak on it? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Ordinance 6492 is before us. No, you get one run kick. You get one kick at the can. All those
5 arguments.
All those. That's the way. That's the way, Rob. That's the.
So this is time for budget discussion.
So
we're not doing that. So I will not go into it.
So,
but just that's all I'm going to say. Thank you.
All those in favor of ordinance 6492 say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
Ordinance passes on a 6-1 vote. We are now moving to Resolution 9700. This is a resolution that would, once again, pursuant to RCW, preserve our banked capacity. And so I'll ask a motion to move 9700.
I move that we adopt Resolution 9700.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to pass Resolution 9700 relating to the banked capacity. Mr. Lee?
I support it because that's said very well by Councilmember Robertson. We have lots of money, a few $1 million banked there. So we're in good shape financially, prudent. And we spend money when we need it. And that's why we have prioritizing. We do priorities. When we get to it, we cannot just say that we need to spend money for the next how many years and commit to it, because we can always raise taxes to do it. That's my statement. So
And the only
I support this.
Great. Thank you very much for supporting it. I will speak to it then. There's a misunderstanding there. The $9 million does not exist. It is banked capacity. We would have to issue a greater property tax increase to be able to create that,
When we need it,
revenue.
we'll do it. The people will do it.
But it's
If we
not
have a
money that
reason,
is sitting there.
If we want to do our police, do our fire, we do. We take good care. We will continue to do so. Don't make me look like a bad person. You know
nope.
that.
Nope.
That's it.
No one is trying to make you look like a bad person, Councilmember Lee. It's just.
That's fine. We don't need to
I mean,
argue.
these are
It's
just
not for
the-
debate.
these-
We're not debating.
Well, okay.
Thank you.
I don't think there's any further discussion. The banked capacity resolution is before us, 9,700. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries on a 7-0 vote. This now moves us to adoption of the ordinance that adopts the modifications to the 2019-2020 biennial budget, normally called the mid-buy, and also adopts the adjustments to the capital investment program.
I move that we adopt ordinance 6493.
Second.
Moved and seconded to adopt ordinance 6493. Are there people who wish to speak to it? Councilmember Robertson.
I'll just be brief. I think that it's just a mid-buy, but there are some important changes, particularly with regard to strengthening our public safety, which is really, in my view, our number one role as a community to make sure that the people who live, work, and recreate in Bellevue are safe. And so I'm supportive of this mid-buy update for that and many other reasons. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak to this issue? I've pretty much said what I want to say for tonight, so anybody else?
No,
Seeing none, the motion before us is the adoption of the mid-buy, which is ordinance 6493. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries on a 7-0 vote. Thank you very much. Thank you to staff for great work on this, and very much appreciate the work and the briefings and the public discussion that we've all had. Thank you. This will now take us to ordinance 6495. This is an amendment to the Bellevue Land Use Code, and this relates to comprehensive plan amendment process. We had a discussion at council recently about this. The ordinance that is before us, I'm just sort of biding time here, but I'll turn it over to Mr. Miyake as our staff gets up.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor and council members. As you mentioned, this matter was last discussed with council on November 4th at the study session where the Planning Commission provided a recommendation on this matter. As you mentioned, there was extensive conversation at that meeting. And what is in front of you today is what was concluded by the council and directed to the staff to return this particular ordinance to you tonight. Matt Cummins, our Director of Community Development, as well as Nicholas Matz, Senior Planner who works for MAC, are here to provide further information about the proposed ordinance, as well as answer any questions the council may have. Mac?
Thank you, City Manager Miyake. Mayor and Council, we don't have anything additional for you this evening on this. We believe this represents what the Council asked to come back for adoption this evening. If there are additional questions of staff, we're happy to answer those this evening.
Okay, are there additional questions of staff at the moment? Councilmember Zahn?
Yeah, I did have a question. So I have to say that this visual is a lot nicer looking than the one that I was scratching on the back of a napkin in looking at with the CPA and what happens if we go from the 3 years that was recommended by staff and the Planning Commission to the 2 years. So I appreciate the work that they did on this. And I guess I am trying to understand when we go from the 3 to the 2, it seems to me that we're actually going backwards instead of trying to close a gap with developers that might put in something that is not well thought out, or then they're pulled at the last minute before they're voted on. So can you either validate what's here or give some comments?
Maybe I'll try to answer the question as it relates to a comment about possibly going backwards. So the starting point for the quote-unquote 3-year waiting period is much further into the process than what you're considering this evening. This evening, you're considering starting a clock of any kind on the date of application. And so you're actually creating a waiting period, whereas none currently exists. So the issue that has arisen in the past is a would-be applicant makes an application and then waits until the very last moment and then withdraws, sometimes up to 4 o'clock in the afternoon on the date of a hearing. And so as the council's evaluated that, you've asked the staff, and we took this to the Planning Commission as well, to evaluate different alternatives to solve for that problem. So what's in front of you this evening is creating the trigger mechanism on the date of application, which starts the clock and actually creates that same waiting period.
Okay, and when this went to the Planning Commission, it was a unanimous decision for the entire recommendation, including the 3-year period, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And was there discussion in the Planning Commission about making that duration shorter?
The Planning Commission had a number of deliberations on each of the points. I'll ask Mr. Mance if he remembers specifically going to 2 years. There was quite a bit.
Yes, council members on, there was quite a bit of discussion about the impact of changing, as Mac has pointed out, the impact of changing when the trigger point starts. They did have that discussion amongst themselves, and they did specifically talk about different time periods and the potential economic impacts it might have, land use impacts, neighborhood participation impacts. So I think they worked it over, but in the end they decided to continue with the 3-year limitation, understanding that you'd be moving the trigger point with the recommendations that's before you.
And then my last question would be, and was there some outreach to the development community about the 3 years?
We specifically sent information about the study sessions and the public hearing to anybody who had made a privately initiated application in the last 10 years.
Okay, because I'm inclined to go back to the council or the staff recommendation of 3 years.
Okay, just in terms of being the liaison to the Planning Commission, there was also discussion, I believe, that would have, while they used the term 3 years, it would have, because they were doing it in either even years or odd years would be the only time, that there actually was one that would effectively have increased it to 4 years.
That's correct, Mayor. In fact, that was related to one of the original proposals referring to the third part of the ordinance tonight, which is when to start the application process and when we cut it off so that we can begin the processing. We had initially suggested a biennial cycle, that is every other year, rather than every year. And the mayor quite rightly pointed out the unintended consequence of that associated with a new 3-year rule would actually make it a 4-year rule. So when we came back for the hearing recommendation, we took that biennial option off the table. And what's before you is the September 15th cutoff for the following year, but that happens every single year.
Councilmember Lee, did you have a question?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mayor. I incline to support the staff's recommendation of 3 years because I think that, we already move it back the day of, application as the short day. And that already signals to the developer that they have to be serious when they apply for something, not just to test the air. And if we kind of, we actually now have 3 years, in a way, that's the practice. If we push it back to 2, it gives a little bit of confusing signal, say, well, are we going backwards or not? Why do we undo something? And furthermore, I think the staff has the city has the opportunity. If some project is really good, that city will support. And we can have a city-initiated comp plan. We can do it in 1 year. So I don't think that is really a true hurdle, not to prevent good projects, serious projects we want to do. So my inclination is we stay with the staff recommendation and for a 3-year period, and we already have made adjustment to signal to the developers, you better be serious if you do that.
Okay, to do that would require an amendment to what is before us now. So I'm just stating that as a matter of fact. We're kind of having the discussion before we put the motion before us. But Councilmember, I'm just going to continue along that way. Councilmember Robertson.
I support the ordinance as it is before us tonight. The changes which we have, I understand the Planning Commission made their recommendation, but it's only a recommendation, and the council is the ultimate authority on what we do with our land use code, as well as whether we grant CPAs or not. So we had extensive discussion on November 4th, and we came up with a compromise that I think I thought the council was fully supportive of. But so since we're going to go ahead and argue this, let me go ahead and go back to all of the things I said on November 4th. I won't say them all, I promise, Mayor. So one of the, I do support the September 15th. And if we are going to having, as I call it, jeopardy attach upon filing of the application, then I think reducing it from 3 years gap to 2 years is fair. Because as it was before, when someone filed an application, we had very few be subject to the jeopardy because people would pull them right before the council meeting hearing on the threshold review. So what we were doing is we were having a lot that came in and again, well, not a lot, but there was a few that came in several times. So by having jeopardy attach upon filing and by making the filing September 15th instead of January, I think 30th or 31st, we are making sure that people have to have their ducks in a row. And I think as a result of having jeopardy attach at filing, we will get more serious, thoughtful applications. But by having the extension then be 3 years, when jeopardy attaches upon filing, I think that is too harsh because, first of all, the change alone makes it more thoughtful, but making it 3 years, I think, disincentivizes stakeholders from engaging in a really productive manner to make things better. What it does is it creates a winner-take-all scenario where people will just try to kill the amendment rather than trying to really engage with it thoughtfully so that they get a 3-year reprieve. I think that you can learn a lot from a failed comprehensive plan amendment, and hopefully when one comes back a couple of years later, it's better and it results in better result for the stakeholders, assuming it is granted. I also think by having a 3-year gap with jeopardy attaching upon filing, you lose the ability to take advantage of opportunities. Remember, this gap applies to properties that didn't apply for a CPA that were scoped in. It applies to properties that may have traded and be subject to other owners with different ideas that might be better and more acceptable to the neighborhood. I think it's a real problem if we create a jeopardy attaching on September 15th and then they can't come back for 3 years. Bellevue is really great. Our economic development discussion is a great example. We are really great at building places that create quality of life for the people who live here, and we are great at taking advantage of opportunities that come our way. To do this, to change it from what we had discussed on November 4th, to have a 3-year gap that starts at September 15th with jeopardy immediately, I think goes the wrong way, and it limits our ability to make things better when the opportunities come along. So I support it as written. Thank you.
Thank you. So I guess we're speaking to it. I didn't speak to anyway.
I'd like to speak to it, but can we just
Let's
make a motion and then have our discussion like we should, or?
Well, it's not necessarily like we should. This is actually a way that we normally do, and it just went in a different direction than where I thought we were.
Well, when it's time, I'm ready to.
So I think what I'm going to do is if it's okay with the council members who have not spoken, you'll still have your opportunity to speak. So I'm going to suggest that we move ahead with putting it before us and then asking if there is an amendment to be made.
I move that we adopt ordinance 6495.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded to adopt 6495. Ms. Robinson, did you want to move an amendment?
Yes, I would, but may I speak to it first, or?
So you need to move it now, because we've gone down this road, you need to move it and have a second for it.
All right. I move that we amend ordinance 6495 to read 3-year limitation instead of 2 years.
Mr. Lee has seconded. So that would mean that you would, anywhere within the ordinance where it's now a 2-year limitation, or with, I don't have the title right in front of me, but
it's in
or
section
a 3-year,
1.
Or that that would be amended before it's signed to indicate that. So it has been moved and seconded. Is there further discussion? And I'll begin with the council members. I'll begin with the maker of the motion if she wants to go, because she did not discuss yet the 3-year versus 2-year.
I would like to just say that the original ordinance that we've been operating by, I believe I'm right, has been 3 years. Is that correct, or is that?
No.
The existing ordinance, excuse me, the existing statute is a 3-year limitation.
Yeah. And so I'm comfortable maintaining this 3-year limitation, and so that I'll be supporting that.
Could you just explain the nuance of the 3-year limitation, because this is different?
Yes, Mayor. It's always, for the work that I do, it's always an exciting moment to explain to people what the 3-year rule does.
Now's your chance.
Now's my chance.
In the beginning.
In the beginning, yes. Thank you, sir. So the existing so when an application comes in, you'll all be familiar, we have a 2-step process. We have threshold review and final review. And the 3-year rule says you cannot be considered for 3 subsequent annual cycles if the council's decision at threshold review is to not advance you into final review, or if you get to final review, if the council denies the application. That still, because the annual process is a year-long process, it's not happening at a point in time. It's happening in that year's annual amendment process. So the 3-year rule applies at either of those points, council action, and then applies for the next 3 annual cycles. As Councilmember Robertson pointed out, moving the application submittal period to the previous year sets you up. It still sets you up for that 3-year rule to count for 3 annual cycles that a property owner would have to be limited from, but it still counts from the same overall annual point in time. That doesn't change because our process is a year-long process. All this is doing by moving the trigger point earlier is to say this will happen regardless of what action is taken throughout the course of the review, whether it's a threshold review or final review.
Other people who wish to speak to it?
I second it. Let me see a few words.
Well, what I was asking for was the 2 people who have not spoken yet.
Okay.
Now, if they wish to speak, I think Mr. Stokes and Mr. Neuenhuis.
Yeah, I have a question. What is the difference between this new proposal in terms of when the filing takes place and the consequences for filing and the current rule?
What is the difference to?
Right now, when you file, the time doesn't start running.
Right. When you file an application now, the 3-year limitation only comes into play if the council takes threshold review action to deny it, or if the council takes final review action to deny the CPA itself.
Right.
This has that same, it's intended for stability. It's intended to give this process, which is a lengthy and legislative process, to give it the ability to work. The 3-year limitation still, whatever number of years, it puts people out of active consideration for that site again for 3 years. With the existing thing, it's a decision that happens at some point within this year-long process. And that's led to this rise in an epidemic of the withdrawals that we documented for commission and previously. With the moving the trigger to the beginning of the process simply alerts people that regardless of the outcome, they will be subject to a 3-year limitation.
Okay. So that's a significant change. And it eliminates that, and that's been the thing people have been complaining about, is having people continually file, and when it looks like it's not going, and the neighborhood has a protest, they drop it and then file again. And they don't have jeopardy at that point. It has to be a decision by the council.
That's correct.
So under this, in the current, what the proposal is now, when does jeopardy attach?
You're actually returning that authority to a property owner.
Right. So it's 3 years, but it would apply in all cases.
It would apply in all cases if council took action to not advance it out of threshold review, and if council took action at the end of the year-long process to not adopt a comprehensive plan amendment.
So if we moved it to 2 years, it would be 2 years after that filing time.
That's correct.
Right. And the reason I support the 2 years is separate from the issue that's been addressed here. And I don't find this chart to be really helpful. The number of those who seemingly caused problems, or some people are complaining about over and over, is only a couple. It's not a handful. It's very, very seldom. Most people file, on the old system, they file and they pull it out before the deadline, and then they file the next year and it goes through. I mean, they work on it. And I think in a lot of cases, the developers then work with the neighborhood or come up with a new proposal. And so there have only been a couple of cases, and one of them actually, and when you look at this chart, there's only a fairly 1 year savings of time here if this was applied under this chart. So it's not a big deal. I think what's important is that we are, and I think we're challenging, what I'm challenging is why the 3-year rule applies anyhow. And just making it set in stone, and everybody has that applied if they don't, if their proposal doesn't go through, means that you can't come back and approve and improve on that proposal, work on that, and come back and within a shorter time period and get something going. So it means if you don't get it approved because of what you have at the time, your proposal, then you're out for 3 years. You're done with that property, essentially. And I think we're missing opportunities. I think with the rapid change of development in this city, we're not as nimble and as smart as we could be on that. I think it's an artificial barrier that I think is not necessary to get good development. And that's why I think the 2-year and having it start when they file is the important piece. And that's a significant change, and I support that. But 3 years is just artificial, and I think it's just too long out to really meet the needs of a changing community.
Mr. Neuenhaus.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I support the ordinance as is as well. Councilmember Stokes makes a good argument that I do believe that 2 years is fair. It is already a deterrent to developers. We do need to remain flexible, and I think this, if we go to 3 years, that takes it out of play. And I do think the 3 years can be punitive in nature, and it really misses out on the ability for neighborhoods and residents to work with that developer and come up with a better solution. So for those reasons, I do think that jeopardy attached upon filing will ensure that only serious applications are coming forward. And with that, I would support the ordinance as is and maintaining the 2-year.
Okay, so now we have everybody except myself who's actually, well, 2 people. I will say the deputy mayor asked a question and then didn't get to speak anymore really to the substance of the issue. I've not spoken to the substance of the issue quite yet. But what I would like to do at this point is to ask who else would like to speak to this, beginning with the people who spoke prior to the motion being made. So that would be Councilmember Zahn, Councilmember Lee, Councilmember Robertson, and I will hold my fire until the end, although hopefully it's just smoke.
I'd like to finish my question.
And then we will come to you to finish your question and make your discussion, okay? I'm just trying to get this. Okay. Councilmember Zahn, we'll just go the same order, I think, that we were in. Councilmember Zahn.
Yes, so in looking at our notes, I do want to note that in our last meeting, actually, both Councilmember Lee and I were supporting the staff recommendation as it was, which is the 3 years. So it was not a consistent unanimous support for reducing it to the 2 years at our last meeting. And then the other one, when we talk about submitting an application that is thoughtful and serious, I remember last time when we spoke, we also, I think, talked about the pre-application process and the ability for any developers to sit down with staff and potentially work through and make sure that before they submit, that they actually do have the bones of an application that is a lot more viable, because that pre-application process gives that opportunity for interactive dialogue. So can you talk about that? Because we haven't talked about that much tonight.
Councilmember Zahn. So as part of this effort, part of this full package, in typical years, people informally come in and they ask us about things, but we don't get the chance to stand that up and subject it to a little more scrutiny and rigor from other departments that end up being involved with the comprehensive plan amendment process when we start the formal review. And in particular, that's land use, transportation, and utilities. With this, we are now requiring a pre-development services application, and to date, we've received some positive responses about that from people. This is the time of year, it's kind of my tax season. It's when people come in and they start inquiring about next year's plan amendment process. And we're hearing some, anecdotally, and some good responses to this idea that we will now have an official pre-development application that allows other departments to weigh in on the potential. What it does then is it lets an applicant, they get a written letter back and allows them to take that information back. And then when it's time to come for the comprehensive plan amendment, then it is a much more rigorously stood up application that would come. So we're hoping that doing it in that fashion will allow those applications to be more real, to be more focused, and to perhaps have a better chance of being discussed throughout the entire plan amendment process.
And then we have staff resources available to support that effort?
We do.
And then my other question would be, so in terms of being able to connect the developer to the community and the neighborhood that may have questions and concerns, so that is also part of the conversation ahead of time?
We typically see that as part of a robust community engagement process throughout the formal process. This allows us to get a heads up earlier on. We always encourage owners of property to reach out to their surrounding communities as part of their formal engagement process. This allows us to help them shape that and have that conversation occur even earlier than it has in the past. But we end up focusing that in the formal review process through our engagement requirements.
So if we could be more proactive with that, I think that will help the situation.
Fair enough.
Thank you.
Fair enough.
Councilmember Lee.
Thank you. I'm very consistent with my positions. So I think that, one thing about the issue that we're looking at is really to discourage people from, frivolously applying, because there's no really consequence. I think this addresses the staff concern that you are, getting a lot of inquiries and actions, and you have to respond to, really without knowing seriously whether they are real, the good project or not. So I think that addresses that one. And second thing is the neighbors are concerned when people started to poking around and say we're going to do something, and they're not really serious. So that's the really issue that we're addressing, is how do we discourage that? So the whole issue that came to us of you doing this is to discourage people from easily applying it. And I think you address that by, changing the application date as to when it starts, and be serious about it. And really, that's the big issue. In terms of how long they have to apply again, that is what is happening currently. So it's not changing it. Because if they don't have a real good proposal, it's not serious, the council is going to deny it anyway, right? And you're going to recommend denying it anyway. And so it's not real. So why waste the time? You don't need to waste your time doing those things. But if they are really serious, it's a good project, you believe it is, you will be very serious working with them. You will be helping them to make it work. And like the Councilmember Zahn suggested, and you will be working, making sure it gets the council's approval. So they have much better chance to get approved than actually don't have to be playing with the game. It's not a gamesmanship. We want solid, concrete, good proposals, which they are serious about. And to be serious, they have to be talking to you. You have to understand the merit of the development, and you work with them, support them. And that's how I think they have much better chance. For developer, that's actually the better way to go about it. You don't want a whole bunch of people just come in and say, gee, I got a piece of land, I want to do something. Let's see what we can get. Come on. You have different examples of that. I talked to Mac, quite a bit. And I believe that they understand what the problem is. They are doing this to correct that problem, both for the city and both for the residents. And this is a solution that will make it work. So there's no reason to play around with it. As I mentioned, if it's a good project, if they are really serious, and if they don't make it for some reason because they made a mistake or oversight, we can help them. We can say the city wants this project. If you are serious, we'll make it happen. We'll do a city-initiated amendment, and it's done in 1 year. So what's the big deal? We're looking at the best interest of the city to begin with, without depending on people playing game with us. So I support this. It's a good thing. We solve a problem, solve a dilemma that we are facing, people are complaining about, and staff is complaining about.
Thank you. We'll go to Ms. Robertson.
Actually, Mayor, I'd really like to hear what Deputy Mayor Robinson and you have to say about this before I take my turn to speak again, if I may.
I'm going to go at the end because I'm pretty fairly consistent in that. But I'll let Councilmember Robinson go and continue with asking any questions and then make your case for why you've recommended 3 years.
So I was wondering if staff could describe the council-initiated amendment for if we decided to just have a developer take 2 years instead of the 3. If we passed the 3-year resolution, but then there was a certain situation where we wanted to speed it up for a developer for a particular reason. Can you speak to that?
Certainly. Council's legislative authority to initiate a comp plan amendment is yours entirely throughout any course of the review. You are only limited by the need to make it part of the work program that you adopt for final review. So council-initiated amendments are presumed to be, on their face, comp plan amendment amendable. And so you skip the threshold review and you go straight to initiating it through final review.
I think I might add, we don't imagine a process for council-initiated CPAs. So the council typically initiates CPAs that are publicly related. So for example, you're going to have one to add transportation projects into the comprehensive plan. We don't imagine a surrogate behind-the-scenes process, if that's the right term, to have CPAs initiated should someone have been denied through the regular CPA process. I think the point in pointing this out is that should something substantial change during that waiting period, there is a process. It's not as if there's no process to address some of those situations, but we don't imagine it being used frequently. And I don't think that was council's intent in wanting to set this up. Council's intent was to be able to solve for the problem of people withdrawing the night of public hearings.
Yeah, I didn't intend to mean that was something we were going to use frequently. I just wanted to show that there is a tool in place if we needed it for a particular situation.
Yes.
And I just wanted you to speak to that.
Yep.
Thank you.
Councilmember Robertson and Councilmember Stokes, and then I actually do have a few more questions, and then I'll say my piece.
So, on the council initiated, the last time that was used for an individual CPA was the St. Margaret's CPA to put affordable housing on their parking lot. And it wasn't a failed CPA. It was a CPA where the church missed the deadline, and they came to council and said, we have this opportunity to put St. Andrew's Housing Partnership to put affordable housing transition, homeless transition on our lot. We think it's our religious duty to do so, and the council initiated it. That is the only time that I know of in the last 20 years that that's been used for an individual. It has never, in my knowledge, been used for a failed CPA. I can't imagine, when staff can't even get time on our agenda, can we actually even imagine that the council, seeing an opportunity, would initiate a CPA that has failed? I don't. I just think that that's pure sophistry to think that that is actually a solution when there's an opportunity that comes along within the 3-year period. So I don't need to go over all my main arguments again, but I will say I think it is 3 years with the earlier jeopardy attaching is unfairly punitive, and it would discourage people from applying for CPAs. It will discourage investment and innovation in Bellevue. I also think it's potentially inconsistent with the Growth Management Act, which recognizes annual comprehensive plan amendments. So I plan to vote against the amendment. Thank you.
Mr. Stokes?
Well, I agree again with my colleague on that and what she just said. I think that's important to keep in mind. I do want to point out that there are only actually 2 examples of developers who went through this, and it was never frivolous. I mean, we're talking about having all kinds of, with this 3-year period and what we're doing now, having a lot of time for the city to work with the developer. That's what we do. I was there at the one that was one of the most contentious ones that, and it was developed. It was not the problem of the developer and being serious or anything else. And I was there, as you know, till late one night in the community, and it was a vigorous discussion. And the developer had a plan that would have worked. The community didn't like, some people in the community didn't like it. And they decided they didn't want to take the risk of the 3 years, and they dropped out. And I think actually, well, whether council would have gone forward is another question, but I just think that the 3-year period, when you have, is just punitive, and it's not necessary to achieve our goals. I think changing this to make the jeopardy at the time they file is the significant piece. And 2 years after that is sufficient time. And the second one, there are only 2 on here, and the second one, again, I saw those. We looked at those, and several other council members and I remember sitting down and thinking, hey, this is really good. Look what's been done. But the community didn't want it, wasn't ready. And it wasn't because developers were just playing games or they're frivolous or whatever. So we're seeing the developers who try to make this work get penalized for 3 years for whatever reason. But at this time, if you get denied, it's for 3 years, and it should be for 2 years. I just think we're mixing things up. We're mixing up some problems that happen with communications, with neighborhoods, and sometimes you have to fight through these things for a time. And we're mixing that up with trying to have a system that actually helps development go forward in a good way that really helps the neighborhood. And I think that's where we're missing the boat on this if we go to the 3 years. And I think it will have a possibly deleterious effect on developers wanting to go forward, particularly for medium properties that, you know, it's iffy in how they're going to go forward on it. And waiting 3 years is just not going to be an option. You'll sell it off, somebody else will come along. I think we're just playing games with it. That's what bothers me on it. I think the 2 years is sufficient time.
Great. Okay, thank you. A couple of questions, and I'm looking at the material that was provided to us by the citizens tonight. The Factoria Boulevard project, is that the doctor's office? There's a doctor, I think it's a doctor and a dentist. And
He was a chiropractor and
Oh.
is long gone, but yes, he was our first multiple application.
And I think that's one where there was one person who owned something there who wanted to do it, and one person who didn't want to do it, and that was kind of the battle. I want to say one of the names was Clark.
Lorch, Dr. Lorch was.
Oh.
Yeah. how do I remember these
Those
things?
were on the other side.
But it came to us.
There, the circumstances there was a small, a cluster of small properties, one of which used to be a house right north of Newport High School. And Dr. Lorge was, there were some joint parking agreements and some different understandings of who was doing what on whose property. And Dr. Lorge kept trying to find a proposed designation that he thought would allow him to make the property more marketable. He cycled through a PO, an O, a multifamily designation. And the underlying strength of the sub-area plan in that area, and it's across the street from Councilmember Robertson's reference to St. Margaret. The underlying strength of the sub-area plan in there, to characterize it, withstood the repeated. Dr. Lorge was withdrawing his applications as he sought over a number of years to find the right match with what he believed the property could be marketed for.
So it was a matter of marketing the property to sell it.
That's correct. They were difficult small sites amidst the larger Factoria area, and it
But didn't match the sub-area plan.
Yes.
Yeah. Banner Bank, that was twice, and that's the one on the Belred transition zone.
Used to have the cannon right on the corner. That one turned out to be two brothers who weren't speaking to each other, even though they jointly owned the property. And you'll see today that a project is being built. I believe there's 44 multifamily units being built on the existing Belred zoning that was in place in 2009. The two brothers, they again sought to come up with a density that was more aligned with what's in the middle of Belred, focused around the high-capacity centers. And again, the strength of the sub-area plan allowed us to have that conversation about what appropriate edge densities should occur in that area. But at the end of the day, the two brothers, as I mentioned, weren't speaking to each other. And then one made one, and then another made one in subsequent years. And they withdrew them both when they ended up with their lawyers speaking to each other.
Okay, and so but a project has gone forward consistent with the Bellevue, the Belred plan,
That's
right?
correct. That's
Okay, so I kind of remember that one as back in, Councilman or Deputy Mayor Robinson mentioned pencils in our earlier discussion as an analogy on software, but I think that was in the days of hearing that it just won't pencil out, but apparently it did. So now I am very familiar with BTC and very familiar with Newport Hills, and they are, is there another, I'm missing, is there another one in here?
No.
Or these were the four?
No, Mayor, that information that you have before there is information that the community has brought to you. What we identified in your study session and previously with the Planning Commission were 11 what we called repeat offenders. We had 11 applications that were shared by 4 property owners, BTC, Newport Hills, Dr. Lorge, and then the Banner Bank ones. And so that's the folks that had done it more than once.
Okay. So this is, I'll just kind of get to it. I would prefer the 3-year, but I do want to have I believe I said that at the last meeting because I sort of remember it being 5-2 or 4-3. And I will always say that I try to warn people that when council gives direction to write an ordinance, it's not necessarily that we are agreeing that that's what we're going to adopt. And I think that's an important thing to mention. The reasoning behind this is I did have the opportunity to listen to the entire discussion at the Planning Commission, and I thought it was a very thoughtful discussion and why they ended up at the 3-year level. And as we get into these last two, we actually have a situation where, from what I can tell, the owner of the property just takes on people, tells them they've got to go down to get the comprehensive plan changed, and that will simply make them more money when they sell. And so that's why we have gone through that cycle on Newport Hills. It is also in the city's interest that Newport Hills redevelop. And we've done some studies regarding that as to how much commercial there could possibly be there. So it is in the city's interest that it redevelop. BTC is slightly different, and there's a acquisition that's been happened, and they've come down and wanted to do some different things, but there's a concomitant agreement that crosses that property, and that begins to be the issue. Land use codes have intended consequences and unintended consequences. One of the unintended consequences of how we do this has been this repeat cycle that has occurred. And I think it has been frustrating to certain neighborhoods, to the Planning Commission, and to many of us. The outlet of a council-initiated CPA should really only be done when there is a good public good that is achieved. I actually do remember one that came to both Councilmember Robertson and I when we were on Planning Commission, and then myself when we were on the council. That was a gentleman who said he needed, and I mentioned it earlier today, there were 3 buildings when I first ran for council that were capped at the foundation. They'd been dug in downtown, and they were capped at the foundation. This gentleman said he needed sky bridges, and we didn't allow sky bridges. And the council initiated a CPA and basically said, work to make this happen. So I think that was one, because there was a good, common good to see that redevelopment start. So you can do that on council-initiated CPAs. St. Margaret is also, I believe, another example that Councilmember Robertson used. So you can bypass that. This does not stop development. We have just done a large comprehensive plan change and land use code change for the downtown. We're about to do it for Wilburton. We did it in the Bellred. Eventually, we will get a Bellred look back that will probably make some, well, eventually you will, that will eventually make maybe some modest changes down there. It looks to me like a lot of the area is developing. So I think what I came down on this was I favored the 3 years, so I will support that amendment and then support that on final adoption. I will have to say if the amendment fails, I will support the 2-year as well, but I think the 3-year is the right way to go. I do think the unintended consequence of this is you will see more people approaching the council trying to do council initiated. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but I really think the council in going forward should really consider to only do a council if there is a identified public benefit from it. So that's where I will go. I believe what we have before us is the amendment. I believe you moved the amendment. So the amendment is to change the ordinance from 2 to 3 years. We're speaking here again of 6495. So I'll call for the vote on the amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
No.
No. 3 noes and 4 ayes. The amendment passes to 3 years. This now brings us, unless there is further discussion on the ordinance or further amendments, I am seeing none. This brings us to final adoption. We certainly can have discussion on final adoption if anybody wants. Seeing none?
Well,
yes, go ahead, Councilmember.
I was supporting this, but I think this is too harsh and inconsistent with the Growth Management Act. And I think that we're ever going to initiate a council-initiated CPA that has failed, no matter what the change of circumstance is, absolutely, if you believe in, the sky is green, it's not going to happen. And I think the outfall of this, where we have people coming to the council trying to get us to prejudge a CPA by initiating it, because, excuse me, have we ever denied a CPA that we initiated? No, that would be no. So I'm really disappointed because I like a lot of the changes here, but I feel forced to vote no because I think this is just over the top harsh. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comment? Yes, I'm sorry, did you wish? Go ahead, Councilmember Nguyen.
Thank you. Yeah, just to follow up on Councilmember Robertson's comment, I do feel like the 2-year was a nice balance, that it addressed the neighborhood resident concerns. It's going to have the effect of developers not pulling their application at the last minute. At the same time, it's really going to enforce with developers that they bring serious applications. So I really do feel like this is a missed opportunity. I think this provided a compromise, a good balance, and I'll also be voting no on this because I also believe that it's too harsh. And what we're aiming for here, which is a worthy goal, I think we can accomplish with 2. And again, the 3-year feels punitive, and as Councilmember Stokes says, I think it'll have a deleterious effect, which is a word I learned tonight, so thank you, Councilmember Stokes. Yeah, I'll also be voting no on this.
Okay. Did you wish to speak, John?
I do think it's a missed opportunity to improve by going to this. I think we got almost there, and then we kind of threw a ringer into it, unfortunately. And I think it's going to potentially have some, particularly for developers in the mid-range, and tying into that, I mean, there are all too many things right now that kind of cause problems, but we've improved so many other things to get things through quickly, to work with people in a very solid way, and to have better communications. And again, the 2 examples that the mayor talked about specifically, I didn't name them, but the 2 there, it's not going to matter. It could be 10 years or whatever. It's not going to matter if you can't come together with the community, and we can't dictate what we want developed on a property. And I think we're setting ourselves up for some problems down the line. And I suspect this council will be revisiting this at some times and saying, okay, we went too far on this. We overshot it because we're trying to solve a problem which we solved, and then we went further than that. But that happens sometimes, but I will vote no.
Okay. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak? I've said my fill. Seeing none, I'll call for the question. All those in favor of final passage of Ordinance 6495 as amended, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
No.
The motion passes on, and I voted aye. The motion passes on a 4-3 vote. Ordinance 6495 passes 4-3. Councilmember Robertson, you are recused from this next item. And with that, we will move back to ordinance, we'll move back to item 10A, which we delayed.
Yeah.
Ordinance 6494. Brief staff report.
I'm going to go ahead and turn over to our city attorney, Kathy Garlow, just to walk the council through the adoption process.
Thank you, Mr. Miyake. Because this is a quasi-judicial proceeding, before we get to the substance of the ordinance, I will need to walk council through disclosure of ex parte communications. The appearance of fairness doctrine requires that we announce the content of ex parte communications and the party's right to rebut the substance at each hearing where the action is taken. So I am again announcing the general content of the 18 emails that contain potential ex parte communications that were previously identified at the council's October 16 appeal hearing and its November 14 meeting. Those emails generally address the topics of energy demand and options on the east side of King County, and there were several emails regarding requests to meet with council members about those issues. As to any new ex parte context since the council's last meeting on this matter, which was on November 14, staff have again searched the council's email address and your individual council members' city addresses and did not disclose any additional or did not identify or find any additional ex parte communications. Mayor Chomanack, I recommend that council members now be provided the opportunity to disclose any additional ex parte communications that may have occurred other than through those accounts since the council's November 14 meeting.
Okay, are there any council members who need to identify any ex parte communication? I've had none. I'm seeing heads that are shaking. The answer to that is no.
Okay,
so if you continue.
If any of the parties to the appeal are here and they wish to rebut the substance of any of the previously disclosed communications, they need to identify that now. And seeing no response to that, I'll turn to the substance of proposed ordinance 6494. Just to refresh the council and the public's memories as to the procedural history behind this ordinance. In June of this year, the city's hearing examiner issued a decision approving Puget Sound Energy's application for a conditional use permit for the South Bellevue segment of the Energize East Side project. The hearing examiner's decision contained 57 conditions of approval that included conditions to mitigate the impacts of the South Bellevue segment. 5 appeals were filed of the hearing examiner's decision, and the council held a limited appeal hearing in October. After review and consideration of the record before the hearing examiner and the arguments of the parties at the council's November 14, 2019 meeting, council members discussed their views on whether or not the appeal should be granted, and the council then approved a motion directing the city attorney's office to draft an ordinance denying the appeals and approving the conditional use permit as approved by the hearing examiner. Proposed ordinance 6494, which is before you tonight for final action, is in response to council's direction. If adopted, it will deny the appeals of all the appellants on the basis that they have failed to meet their burden to prove that the hearing examiner's decision wasn't supported by material and substantial evidence in the record. It also contains conclusions about the council's lack of jurisdiction over several issues. And finally, the ordinance approves the CUP application of PSC for the South segment, subject to all of the numerous conditions that were imposed by the hearing examiner. Again, this is before you tonight for final action. One final reminder before I conclude the staff report is that should the council approve this ordinance tonight and deny the appeals, the council should still not discuss this matter with members of the public supporting or opposing the application, because the matter is likely to be appealed to the Superior Court and will still be pending in the court system and could be remanded back. And that concludes the staff report.
Thank you. So we have before us, it has not been moved yet. But again, this is an unusual situation where the council is acting essentially as an appellate court. What we had before us previously, I would say, is akin to an appellate court giving a oral decision and then going and writing the decision. In this case, it's slightly different, in which we gave direction to write an ordinance. That ordinance is now before us doing what the council concurred to do. So I would ask for a motion to adopt ordinance 6494.
I move that we adopt ordinance 6494.
Second. It has been moved and seconded to adopt ordinance 6494. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Ordinance 6494 is adopted. Thank you. That brings us to the conclusion of our agenda for this evening. It would appear that this evening, those of you who are football fans, we won an NFL game and went into the lead for the NFC West, and the 2 major universities in the state lost their coaches. So an interesting day for football fans. All right. Is there any other business to come before the council? Seeing none, we're adjourned.